Hey, very quickly before we start.
But if you know, you know. But if you know, you know. But if you know, you know.
My new song, If You Know, is available on every streaming platform right now, and the music video is on YouTube. All the links will be in the description. Thanks.
Klaus, get out here and tell me what you've done with that brother, you narcissistic, backstabbing wanker!
All right, here we go. So last summer, I made a video about the CW's 2009 mega hit show, The Vampire Diaries. A series that marked me and millions of people when I was a teenager, and more or less had an entire generation in a chokehold. We went over the show's origins, the seasons, the characters, the writing, the highs, the lows. It was a good time, honestly. The video was quick and concise. I kept it short, 2 hours and 41 minutes. Okay? Average length of a Marvel movie. Yeah, I kinda went off with this one, but believe it or not, despite how long it was, that video was only part one of a trilogy of videos about the Vampire Diaries universe, and today we are gonna talk about the show I am the most excited to talk about in this whole thing, The Originals. Which is funny because unlike The Vampire Diaries, The Originals is a show that I had never finished until very recently. That's right, I spent the last few months rewatching the whole show and taking an extensive amount of notes from beginning to end. It was a very long process, but I made it. A few brain cells are missing, I haven't found them yet, but I'm here, that's what matters. So for the uninitiated, what is The Originals? Who are The Originals? I explain it in way more detail in my Vampire Diaries video, so I invite you to go watch that if you haven't. But here's the quick backstory. In season 2 of the Vampire Diaries, the heroes, Elena, Damon, Stefan, and their friends, find themselves in an all-out war with a 1,000-year-old family known as the Originals, the very first vampires. They're named the Michaelsons, and the most important person in that family is Klaus, the one who essentially becomes the big bad of the season. At this point in the timeline, Klaus is known as the most powerful being in existence. They call him the Hybrid. He is half vampire and half werewolf, which basically makes him a god, and he spends the season trying to unlock his full power to become invincible and even more powerful than he already was. Long story short, he goes head to head with Elena and the gang, and in an ending that was completely unexpected and kind of rare for stories in this genre, the season ends with the heroes losing. Klaus executes his plan exactly the way he had envisioned it, and he defeats his enemies in the process. The heroes actually fail to save the day, and the season ends with them having to bury their dead, because Klaus also kills some of the main characters of the show in the process. It's a very dark ending that, added to his incredible charisma, immediately made Klaus one of the most memorable villains in any TV show ever.
Okay. Who's next?
Klaus and his family returned as the villains of season 3, and by that point they were so insanely popular that executive producer Julie Plec and the CW decided to get them their very own spin-off, simply titled The Originals. And we are going to talk about it today because this show is very, very interesting to dive into. Oh, and also, my Vampire Diaries video was the longest video on my channel. I worked on it for 9 months and it was instantly demonetized when it went up. I worked on this video for almost a year, and I made $0 off of it. I'm guessing it's gonna be the same with this one because for some reason Warner Brothers is very harsh with Vampire Diaries content. So Skillshare! Skillshare, if you don't know, is a massive online community where you can basically learn, well, just about anything really. That's why it's called Skillshare. Get it? Because it's it's sharing skills. I've gotten a number of messages from you guys asking me about my editing or filmmaking in general, and Skillshare is exactly where you want to go for that. There are literally thousands of interesting classes for curious and creative people out there about pretty much anything you want to explore or any goal you want to reach. For example, in the last year or so, I've been taking on a lot of projects professionally, way more than usual, and I'm trying to get better at time management because I want to make more time for things I find fulfilling outside of work, and I don't want work to overtake every waking moment of my life. So I've been looking into the productivity and time management classes curated by Skillshare to explore different ways to achieve more of a balance, and it's been really helpful. I've also been dabbling into animation. It's something that's always fascinated me, and Skillshare also has a number of very detailed classes to learn about pretty much any style of animation you can think of. This class by Danny Fisher-Shin is particularly good. Really, with Skillshare, no goal is too small. And you know what? You guys are in luck, because the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will be able to get a month free trial of Skillshare. That is one entire month of being able to explore any topic you've been curious about and learn about it for free. And I mean it, guys. Anything. There's business classes, finances classes, self-improvement classes, photography, illustration, video editing, interior design, anything you can think of. You get 1 month to explore all of it for free. So, if that speaks to you, click that link in my description, join Skillshare, and start learning. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. You guys make these big projects possible, and let's get back to the originals. So, now that you have the context of where the spin-off came from, it's time to talk about the show itself. Like I said, I think this show is fascinating to look at. The thing that's interesting with the originals is how divisive it is amongst fans of The Vampire Diaries. And that divisive aspect is super polarized. Some people absolutely love this spin-off. They only swear by the originals. Many fans also believe it's better than The Vampire Diaries, and they consider it to be the best entry in the universe, period. With some even being of the opinion that it is simply the best show to ever be made by the CW. And on the other end, you have a massive portion of the fandom that absolutely hates this show. They think it's atrocious and unnecessary, and they feel like it messes with the lore too much, and many think that, lore and necessity aside, it's just a bad television program. Even Jenny Nicholson, this absolute legend, said in her iconic TVD video that she gave up on the originals very quickly, and she referred to it as one of the worst shows she's ever seen. I mean, hell, I asked you guys on Instagram which show you prefer between The Vampire Diaries and the originals. About 5,000 people voted, and The Vampire Diaries won with 71%. But I also got hundreds of messages from people telling me they only voted for The Vampire Diaries because they'd never seen the originals. So I don't know how accurate that result is. Oh, and by the way, follow me on Instagram. We do fun stuff like that all the time, and it's just fun to interact with you guys. My personal opinion is somewhere in the middle. However, I should say, I think it makes sense that this show is so divisive among fans. The originals feels distinctly different from The Vampire Diaries. It's a spin-off that very much has its own identity. It is not the same type of show as TVD. It's a bit more adult, it's darker, it deals with different themes. It's not as heavy on the melodrama, it just feels like its own show rather than an extension of The Vampire Diaries. Is that different identity a good thing? Well, that depends on who's watching it. If you were into The Vampire Diaries for the romance and the ships and the love triangles and all the teen melodramatic genre tropes, then yeah, the originals may not be the show for you. It has its fair share of romance, but it doesn't lean into it nearly as much as the other show. In The Vampire Diaries, the romantic storylines are always at the center of the story. Everything is built around the romance. But in the originals, it's not as blatant. The show focuses way more on other themes that give it a completely different atmosphere. And as for the show as a whole, I think the originals is super divisive among fans because of its individual traits. In other words, when the show is good, it's really good, like surprisingly good for a CW show. But when it's bad, holy hell, it sucks ass. But anyways, we'll get to all of this. Let's break it down.
Break it down.
So the originals follows the adventures of Klaus Mikaelson and his siblings outside of Mystic Falls. After finding out that a witch in Louisiana is conspiring against him, Klaus Mikaelson makes his way to the city of New Orleans to investigate the coven that might be after him. But when he arrives, he finds out that the city he built from the ground up 300 years ago is now under the tyrannic control of his former protege, Marcel. Marcel runs New Orleans like a cruel king with an army of vampires, and he brutally murders any witch that dares to use magic on his territory. However, Klaus is very quickly tracked down by his brother Elijah, who brings him to a witch named Sophie. Sophie's sister was executed by Marcel for using magic, and she wants to take revenge by taking him down once and for all. But she needs Klaus's help. Klaus is completely uninterested in her quest until Elijah reveals to him that Sophie has kidnapped Haley, a werewolf who had a one-night stand with Klaus and somehow got pregnant, making Klaus the first vampire in history to achieve natural reproduction. This completely changes the world. After 1,000 years of existence and tyranny, the first heir to the original family is about to be born. But Sophie tells Klaus she will kill Haley and the baby if she refuses to help take Marcel down. Torn between his desire for a family and his unstoppable thirst for power, Klaus decides to drastically shift the status quo, and he goes against everyone as he starts a supernatural all-out war in New Orleans. I mean, right off the bat, that premise is completely different from anything we've ever known in the Vampire Diaries. This show started immediately wanting to be its own thing. The pilot is confusing as hell, and that's because the first episode of the originals is not actually the first episode of the show. If you want to start the originals, you don't start with episode 1 of season 1 of the originals. You have to start with episode 20 of season 4 of the Vampire Diaries. It's a backdoor pilot of the show that establishes the entire storyline, while the first episode of the spin-off acts more like a fast-tracked recap with some new scenes that show the events from the point of view of Elijah. It just adds a bit more context, but if you start with episode 1, you're gonna miss a lot of very important plot points and you're gonna be confused as hell. Okay, we got the basics down. Everybody ready? Let's dive in.
You got me feeling mellow. You think I'm acting ghetto. You're weird like Jared Leto.
I really like the first season of the originals. It's such a nice change of pace from the Vampire Diaries because the show takes a different approach to the lore and delves into the politics of the supernatural world, something that we had never seen before in this universe. It makes the conflicts of the story play out like a game of chess, which is more interesting than most of the fights in the Vampire Diaries. Klaus plotting a long con to dismantle Marcel's trusted circle from the inside is honestly really good. It shows that, aside from being an unkillable creature with immense strength, Klaus is also incredibly intelligent and he is a master tactician. We've been told that he never lost a war for 1,000 years, and this show is where we really get to see why that is. But above all, the thing I love the most about season 1 is that it very much deals in shades of gray. It doesn't have a clear-cut hero or a clear-cut villain. The show is about powerful people butting heads over their political agendas. Marcel is defending his territory and keeping the factions in check by using fear as a tool and violence as a sword. But he also keeps the peace in the quarter by making deals with the humans and the witches that almost function like treaties. He allows the witches to live in New Orleans as long as they don't practice magic, and he ensures they will never be harmed, but he also makes it clear that any witch who is caught practicing magic will be immediately executed. And as long as they respect their end of the agreement, Marcel ensures that his vampires never set foot on their sacred lands. The human council of the city allows the vampires to go about their activities activities as long as they can keep it quiet and maintain the secret of the supernatural world. They let vampires feed on humans as long as they don't kill their prey and do not draw any attention to themselves. And there are details that make it even more tangible, because Marcel explains that maintaining the secret and laying low is in his interest, because his vampires often feed on tourists, and if the news start reporting an endless series of gruesome and unexplained murders in New Orleans, tourism will go down and his people will go without food. It's honestly just really good world building. It makes this alternate version of New Orleans feel real and lived in. Klaus comes back to New Orleans and realizes that Marcel built a well-oiled machine, and he's not too pleased to see that everyone seems to have forgotten about him. He's jealous of Marcel's success and he wants it for himself. He wants New Orleans back. He wants to be king. Except he also knows there are witches plotting against him, so for now, it is in Klaus's interest to remain close to Marcel and act like a simple visitor, because he knows the witches cannot do magic. The first little mystery of the season comes with the revelation that Marcel apparently has a secret weapon that is said to be of unspeakable power. It's this secret weapon that makes him invincible, and it's also how he knows as soon as a witch uses magic. So Klaus obviously gets curious, and the question becomes, what is that secret weapon? And we find out at the end of the following episode that Marcel's weapon is not a weapon, but a person. He has under his wing a young girl named Davina, a witch that was victim of a failed ritual that made her carry the power of several witches, essentially making her a kind of super witch who is far too powerful for the coven living in the quarter. Marcel saved her life, took her in, and became a father figure to her, and she uses her magic to help him keep control over the city. Long story short, the first 3 episodes, including the backdoor pilot, are very much putting an insane amount of effort to put the different chess pieces on the chessboard. And if you ask me, it does it fantastically. Klaus ends up betraying his brother Elijah, trying to have everything both ways, as he does, which then leads his sister Rebecca to leave Mystic Falls, the town from the Vampire Diaries, and come to New Orleans looking for Elijah. And after more shenanigans, the siblings band together as one to protect Haley and the baby, keep her pregnancy a secret, because if the world finds out she is carrying Klaus Michelson's child, she will immediately become the biggest target of the entire world. And they unite as one to take on their enemies and win the war for New Orleans, reclaiming the home they built 300 years ago.
I don't remember it involving you two drinking New Orleans dry together.
I know you don't have many friends, Rebecca. But what some friends do when they get together is they drink. And when they drink, they tell secrets.
We also meet a character named Camille, a mortal woman and a psychology student who just moved to New Orleans. At first, she appears like an ordinary bartender just living her life, but we later find out that she moved to New Orleans seeking answers about the death of her twin brother. He was a seminary student on his way to become a priest, and he was known for being lovely and friendly until he suddenly lost his mind and murdered all 9 of his fellow students inside of the quarter's church before taking his own life. It was a horrible tragedy that plagued the town, but Camille always felt like something about his death didn't add up. So she decided to move to New Orleans to investigate. She eventually meets Klaus on the night he returns to town, and they form a deeply emotional bond that carries through most of the show. And Klaus's moments with Camille kinda serve as some very emotional moments in the story. There's a really sad episode where Klaus compels Camille to abandon her fixation over her twin brother's death, and he makes her accept it against her wishes. He thinks doing that will help her find some peace in her life, but Camille essentially having her grief taken away by Klaus without it having a natural conclusion leaves her feeling empty and directionless. Season 1 is just really solid with setup. It is so good at establishing its different characters and the general status quo of the political mayhem at the center of the show. The rising tension is fascinating, every main character is connected to the others, and they all have very distinct relationships that all have real weight on the way the story evolves. The way the show blurs the lines between friends and enemies is super compelling, and it always makes for interesting conversations at the center of the conflict. You never really know how characters are going to react to situations put right in front of them.
You're coming with me, little wolf.
Why would I go anywhere with you?
Because, Haley, that child you carry is the only thing on this earth that matters to me. Now, you can fight me on this, but you will lose.
Klaus's relationship with Elijah is obviously very fascinating. Elijah's obsession with saving Klaus's soul is both endearing and also very tragic, because we keep seeing the unimaginable amount of sacrifices he had to make for his brother, most of the time in vain. Their dynamic is so unique, and I absolutely love watching these two interact. Seriously, some of my favorite sequences in the show are scenes where Klaus and Elijah just get to talk, like have a conversation. These two actors just bounce off of each other too well. Their chemistry is out of this world, but also their performances are very theatrical. Like, watching them feels like watching a stage play, and I kind of love that for two characters that are supposed to be 1,000 years old.
Oh, that's going well.
If you were trying to win the girl's trust, perhaps poisoning her one true love was not the most splendid idea.
Oh, are there any more inopportune deaths you'd like to wave in my face?
Give me a month. I'll get you a list.
Rebecca Michelson is one of my favorite characters, so it is quite sad that she is not as present in this show as her two brothers. If you don't know, by the time this show came around, Claire Holt had already been playing Rebecca for about 3 years, starting in season 3 of The Vampire Diaries. And soon after the start of the originals, she started feeling a bit homesick, and she decided to leave the show to go back to Australia and be with her family and friends. So she was written out of the story halfway through the season. Thankfully though, Claire was still very committed to the character of Rebecca, and she came back for a handful of episodes every season to make sure her absence never feels too long and Rebecca could always remain an integral part of the story. And to their credit, the writers are consistently really good at writing her in and out of the show seamlessly. The reasons for her departures and returns are always perfectly logical within the context of the story, and they actually always find a way to make it so that the plot moves forward thanks to Rebecca. So even if she's way less present than the rest of the cast, she's just as important as Klaus and Elijah for the show to function. Rebecca is not a perfect character, we'll talk about that later, but I still absolutely adore her, and her relationships with each of her siblings are all very distinct and compelling to watch unfold.
I see you still have a thing for blondes.
Hey! Tell me where Elijah is.
What the hell is going on?
Tell me where he is or I will kill you.
I also found myself really enjoying the weird love-hate relationship between Klaus and Haley. I will say though, at first it felt a bit odd that Haley and Elijah developed a romance when Haley is literally pregnant with Elijah's niece. But somehow, the writers sort of managed to make that shift work. Sort of. Haley and Elijah's romance is really well handled and very engaging. It's always a little weird that Elijah is actively pursuing the mother of his brother's child, but it allows for the frenemy situation Haley has with Klaus to just be really good. Like, you can tell that in his weird way, Klaus does actually care about Haley and vice versa. They hate each other most of the time, they never agree on anything, they always fight, they're always threatening to kill each other, but also, whenever somebody tries to hurt Haley, Klaus goes absolutely fucking ballistic. And outside of all their disagreements, they also get some genuinely tender moments when they show each other some love and respect. Their relationship is full of nuance, and it surprisingly became one of my favorite aspects of the show. I do like the parallel that Davina is to Marcel what Marcel was to Klaus. We find out in this show that Marcel was rescued by Klaus as a child hundreds of years ago and raised by the Michelsons as an adopted son. This story point has a little issue that bugs me, but we'll talk about that much later in the video. I'm not a big fan of Davina as a character, but as far as her relationship with Marcel goes, it is very effective. You get the gist. This show is really good when it comes to character relationships. It does it in a way that feels compelling and relatable, which is absolutely crucial for the show. If these relationships don't work, nothing else about the show will work. But thankfully, that is one of the show's greatest strengths. However, while I have all this good stuff to say, I have to be fair and also say that I understand why some people gave up on this show early. Despite all of its qualities, I think season 1 has about an equal amount of flaws. It has an amazing setup, yes, but this season gets messy very quickly. And it's also kind of dragged down by really shitty pacing. That's a symptom of the CW refusing to abandon the 22 episode season model, but it's also on the writers. You'll have like 2 or 3 episodes in a row where shit is happening and it's intense and fun, the stakes are there, the characters are having some really strong moments, but then you have to get through like 3 or 4 episodes where nothing really happens, and you can tell the show is dragging itself through filler plot lines because there's just too many episodes to complete the season, so we need to waste time before getting back to the important shit. I like to call these slow moments filler checkpoints. It's when the main story of the season hits its big turn and now has to enter a period of non-story fill time. The very first filler checkpoint in the originals comes in episode 5. That's the first time the main story of the season suddenly comes to a halt. Episodes 1 through 4 are full of suspense, it's supernatural politics, scheming, silent agendas, backstabbing, a highly dangerous game of chess. It's thrilling, it's fun, and then episode 5 rolls around and it just completely loses its momentum. Episode 5 is literally just a 40-minute exposition dump about a side quest surrounding a stupid ritual that took place before the events of the show. Davina spends the entire episode sitting with Elijah, vomiting exposition non-stop. It's so long and so boring, and it all leads to a twist that would have been so much cooler if it was in a short scene. And that then leads us into episode 6, which only exists to get rid of a plot issue for Haley, and episode 7 flat out wasting everybody's time with fucking Tyler from the Vampire Diaries showing up as a throwaway villain of the week. And I just gotta ask, who gives a fuck about Tyler?
But first,
It's only in episode 8 that the real plot kicks back in, and that episode is fucking awesome. It's the episode that has the very famous scene where Klaus takes on an entire army of vampires on his own. And this scene was just crazy. I remember when the episode aired, I had friends calling me after asking me if I had seen it. The internet was in flames. It's really the first time this show displays the full might of an original, and damn, this scene does not disappoint.
So this is it. The evil bastard Klaus has gone too far. Must be punished. And by his own sibling, nonetheless. How positively biblical.
Trying to get clean. He says, wash your hands, get out the stain. You best believe, boy, there's hell to pay. Yeah, you best believe, boy, there's hell to pay. Saying, that's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT! No matter what.
This scene is so fucking rad. It's also a great scene because it tells you a little bit more about the status of this war and what Klaus is doing. He's trying to take the power in New Orleans in a low-key manner, in a political way, if you will. But this scene shows that if his back is put against the wall, he will just kill everyone and take it anyway. And nobody will be able to do anything about it because he's fucking Klaus Michelson. And realizing that causes Marcel to be so terrified of him that he bends the knee and just surrenders the key to his kingdom to Klaus.
Well, well, well. The great Marcel, self-proclaimed king of New Orleans, bowing before me.
But you can also tell that Marcel caves because he knows Klaus can never truly be king in that way, which leads to one of my favorite moments in the originals. Klaus and Marcel's conversation about the meaning of loyalty in the last act of episode 8 is really interesting and does a great job at explaining why Klaus's paranoia and fear of abandonment can never truly end.
You own all this, fine. It's yours. You can put me back on the street for all I care. But let's make one thing clear. You'll never have this. Loyalty. You can't buy it. You can't own it. You can't force it. It comes only out of love and respect for the people who believe in you.
And then his final monologue to Elijah and Rebecca is just amazing and surprisingly emotional, because it just shows how much Klaus is trying to change, but he thinks he won't matter if he does. And the scene is made even more powerful by Joseph Morgan's insane performance.
What have I done lately, other than cooperate? I bow down to you, brother, to make up for daggering you, for the greater good of our plan to reclaim our home. Look the other way, sister, while you repeat the same cycle with Marcel, falling again for a man you shouldn't be with, while he controls the empire that we built.
It's just a great entry. I fucking love episode 8. I think it is easily in the top 5 episodes of the entire show. And then the plot carries on up until episode 11, and we go back into a filler checkpoint. This time with the introduction of a random warlock villain that quite literally comes out of nowhere. And then we go into a very long series of flashback episodes in the year 1919. And it goes on for a while, and the story of the season gets off target. I'd say episode 13 is the point where season 1 gets a little boring. It gets needlessly convoluted, there's too many characters at some point, it suddenly has really bad pacing, it becomes slow, the plot drags, it feels like the writers are just trying to buy time because they have to complete a 22 episode season. We waste a lot of time on the werewolves, who were always the most uninteresting part of the entire TVDU. Like, bro, I don't give a shit about Jackson. Stop it. And overall, the middle chunk of the season kinda loses the momentum of the start. I think the show starts really strong, then it falls off in the middle, but with all that said, the end of the season kinda picks up a bit in the last 2 episodes. There's a lot happening, and in typical TVD universe fashion, the story is a little too convoluted for its own good by that point. And again, there's way too many characters at play there, but it is thrilling. The stakes feel real, the tension is at an apex, and you can sense that we are building towards an inevitable confrontation. Episode 21 is titled The Battle of New Orleans, and it is just a fantastically executed climax for all the main storylines in the season. And it gives us some genuinely great moments.
Gentlemen, shall we?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you saw that right. This episode has Elijah taking on an army of vampires by himself. And he wins. Finally getting a proper one-on-one fight scene between Klaus and Marcel, who is clearly outmatched but somehow manages to give Klaus a run for his money, is also really cathartic after all of the tension between them throughout the season. The theme of the son becoming a better man than his estranged father is really strong here. Despite their differences, the season always allows them to show each other compassion, and it really makes the layers of their relationship feel strong and impactful. And then this episode ends with Haley being kidnapped by witches right when she is about to give birth. It's a fantastic cliffhanger that leads us to the season 1 finale, which, in my opinion, is one of the most emotional episodes of the entire show. And when I say this episode is emotional, this is not a joke. Having the finale starting with a voiceover of Haley reading a letter she wrote to her daughter while we watch her being tortured by witches through labor is incredibly dark and sad. She's doing everything she can to save her daughter, but is so powerless against several of the deadliest witches known to the town. One of Haley's biggest themes as a character is her desire to have a true family, because she was adopted and never knew where she came from. Becoming a mother was her only way to experience that fully, and we watch as these witches take that away from her. Klaus shows up, furious as hell and ready to unleash his full might to save Haley and his daughter, but even he can't stop the witches. They pin him against a wall with a spell, and he has to watch his daughter being born and taken away from him, completely powerless. And in an even darker twist, the witches kill Haley on their way out, right in front of Klaus. The fact that a witch slits her throat the moment she gets to hold her daughter in her arms for the first time is fucking brutal. It's really the type of moment that reminds you that this show is much darker than The Vampire Diaries. It really goes to sinister places. Haley does come back to life though, thankfully, because she dies with her daughter's blood in her system, so she wakes up and becomes a hybrid. But nevertheless, I think the opening of the season 1 finale will still go down as one of the darkest moments in the entire Vampire Diaries universe. Story-wise though, I feel like season 1 closes in a compelling way for virtually every single character. The fact that the season ends with Marcel's army actually getting exterminated is really cool, and it gives season 2 an open door to reinvent the dynamic in a really interesting way. The idea that the originals can only protect Klaus and Haley's daughter by making the entire world believe she died during the Battle of New Orleans is really grim, but the reality that they have to send her away right after having her is also really sad. But it is a great setup for the characters in season 2. Learning that they choose to give up having a life with their baby to protect her is just really heartbreaking. But the fact that Rebecca is the one chosen to raise her is just perfect. Claire Holt coming back as Rebecca for the finale genuinely made me smile, and her scene with Klaus as he gives her his daughter is genuinely beautiful. There's just something about this scene that makes me so emotional. It might be my favorite scene in the entire show.
If you leave.
Hello, sister.
Oh, she looks like her mother. Maybe there is a God after all.
Well, she has a hint of the devil in her eyes. That's all me.
Ugh, this scene is incredible. It makes me melt every time. It's just so well written. Like, Klaus and Rebecca have such a complicated relationship with so much tension and hatred, but in the end, she's the one he goes to when it comes to protecting the most precious thing he's ever had.
In spite of our differences, Rebecca, there is no one I would trust more with my daughter's life.
Klaus giving his final words to his daughter and telling her he initially wanted New Orleans back for himself, but that now he will take it back to make it a safe home for her, got me right in the feels. And the scene ends with Klaus revealing his daughter's name for the very first time.
She will be happy, Nick, I promise. What's her name?
Hope. Her name is Hope.
Bro, I swear to God, this scene has no right to be as good as it is. I have watched it dozens of times and it still gets me. I don't like using the word perfect, but I genuinely think this is a perfect scene. The setting, the tone, the choice of music, both Joseph Morgan's and Claire Holt's performances, the dialogue, everything about this scene just hits and I never get tired of it. They genuinely could not have done this scene better. It is perfect. And then the season ends with a final cliffhanger showing us that Esther, the original's mother, has come back to life in a new body, along with another one of the Michelson siblings. And they march together towards New Orleans, kind of announcing them as the main antagonists of season 2. It's not the greatest cliffhanger of all time, if I'm being honest, but it works well enough. Overall, season 1 of the originals is pretty good. It tries to be different, some aspects of it are very hit or miss, but I'd say a good 70% of it works pretty well. It sets up the world of this show in a very effective way, the world building is crazy, the emotional beats are for the most most part, quite powerful. Like, for all the things it tries, Season 1 really stands out for its effort to build an identity very distinct from the Vampire Diaries, and it mostly succeeds.
You got me feeling mellow. You think I'm acting ghetto. You're weird like Jared Leto.
Alright, Season 2, the sophomore season. Going into it, I didn't really know what to expect because I didn't remember much of it. I mean, admittedly, it has been 9 years since it's aired, so there is that. But yeah, aside from a scene or two, I had like no memory of it. So long story short, the premise of Season 2 is this. Esther, mother of the originals, has returned in a new body and resurrected Cole and Finn, Klaus's other brothers, who she also put in new bodies, now making them witches. Now, Esther is the one who created the first vampires. 1,000 years ago, she was paranoid about her children's lives and she decided to use her magic and do everything in her power to make them immortal. She went way too far with it and ended up making them and her husband Michael the first vampires. But seeing what that turned into and seeing the violent nature of vampires horrified her. She thinks they are abominations. Everything about them is against nature, so she wants them eradicated. She tried to kill her children several times, but now she has a different plan. She believes she can rid her children of their sins and send them on a path to salvation if she can make them mortal again. So basically her plan is to convince Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca to give up their immortality and allow her to give them a second chance at life by transporting their soul into mortal bodies. That way they can live a life free of sin and die a natural death. I always liked that story because in the realm of the Vampire Diaries universe, it shows the dangers of trying to play God. But now, Esther wants to play God again, but to undo the mistakes she made 1,000 years ago. But that's not all. At the end of the last season, Davina, who was seeking revenge against Klaus, secretly brought back Michael, the father of the originals, a vampire who hunts vampires. Michael also believes that vampires are abominations that need to be eradicated, and his children are literally his worst enemies. He spent 1,000 years hunting them down and trying to kill them, but he has a particular hatred for Klaus, because Klaus is a bastard. He is not Michael's biological son. He's the product of an affair Esther had with a werewolf. Davina keeps Michael locked away for now and doesn't allow him to kill the originals yet because of their sire lines, the magical bond that ties each original to every single vampire that originated from them turning people. Basically, if an original vampire dies definitively, every single vampire from their sire line will die with them. So Davina can't let Michael kill Klaus yet, because if Klaus dies, Marcel will die with him. So in the meantime, she keeps him hidden so she can keep the element of surprise since nobody knows Michael is back. So basically, in a very global way, Season 2 of the originals is Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca against the rest of the Michaelsons. It's a big old messy reunion, like at the end of Love is Blind. The only difference, of course, is that there is no Vanessa Lachey incessantly asking every woman in the cast when they're having babies. Stop being a weirdo, Vanessa. Oh, and also people die horrible deaths. That's the other difference. The idea of the villains of the season being the entire Michelson family is really interesting on paper. Each member has its own very complex relationship with other members, and their presence makes for an organic exploration of the family's past. We get to learn a bit more about what the Michelsons were like 1,000 years ago, and so the confrontation building into this season feels like it's an inevitable clash. Just like Season 1, the setup is there, and it is solid. However, unlike Season 1, the execution is not there. Season 2 of the originals is not very good. I don't like it. It still has some solid elements throughout, but narratively speaking, this season just doesn't work for me. It's messy, it's way too convoluted, there are a number of narrative decisions that come out of nowhere. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I got bored very fast with the first half of Season 2, and this is also the season that has the biggest amount of pointless filler arcs in the entire show. It drags, and the progression of the story does does not feel as smooth as the previous season. And remember that the previous season already had some pacing issues. While the whole idea of the Mikaelson family finally being reunited for a big final confrontation was thrilling at first, it quickly gets really tedious, especially when it comes to Esther. Esther is supposed to be the leading antagonist of the first half of the season. She has a lot to do in this story, and we had seen Esther in the Vampire Diaries already. The character is cool, but she ends up falling completely flat here. And that is because of the writer's choice to constantly have her body hopping throughout the season. Like I said earlier, Esther comes back to life in a new body with Cole and Finn. Esther specifically is switching bodies a lot, and she's being played by like 3 different actresses, and it kind of reminded me of the Thinker, the villain from season 4 of The Flash, who also had the ability to hop from body to body. That villain ended up falling flat because it's super hard to relate and get attached to a character when said character is being played by different actors every episode with little to no consistency. In the originals, Esther is portrayed very differently by every actress taking on the role, which makes her completely lose her unique identity. And it's unfortunate because Alice Evans, the actress who plays the real Esther, the original one, is really good in the role. And it's not like they had to switch her because she wasn't available or whatever. No, she's constantly showing up in flashbacks. So the choice to constantly have her jump from body to body is odd. It just makes her too inconsistent. Alice Evans plays Esther as this calm and collected woman who hides a great deal of power behind her smile. She's direct but composed. We also see she's capable of a lot of tenderness and love. There's always a warmth to her when she talks to her children, and when she's being reactionary, she becomes threatening, but in a subtle way. However, the second actress to play her takes a very different approach. She makes Esther very cold and stoic. She doesn't show emotion and barely reacts to anything. She carries herself differently. She has a smug, almost arrogant attitude that does not fit the character. Like, it makes her way too literal of a villain, but she's only here for a couple of episodes before Esther jumps into another body, and we get a new actress in episode 3. And she also plays Esther completely differently. From one scene to another, suddenly Esther is now portrayed as angry and spiteful and almost aggressive. Every word that comes out of her mouth is full of venom, and it doesn't fit the previous 2 iterations of the character. She talks differently, all of her lines are delivered like she's reciting poetry. It's way too theatrical. Like, I don't know, I feel like it just kind of kills Esther a little bit. These 3 actresses are playing the same character, but their individual takes on that character are so different that it always feels like a completely different person. So, as a result, it's kind of hard to give a shit about Esther because you barely get the time to get to know her before another actress completely reinvents what the character is with a completely different performance. And I know, it sounds like it's not that big of a deal said like that, but it actually makes a huge difference when it comes to solidifying a character and cementing their gravitas. Nina Dobrev was particularly good at that in the Vampire Diaries. The sharp performance shift between Elena Gilbert and Catherine Pierce is what made these 2 characters work as the doppelgangers. Nina doesn't just act sassy when playing Catherine, she changes everything. The way she stands, the way she walks, the way she talks, the way she smiles. She just carries herself differently to bring the character a different energy. It's especially true in the early seasons. Elena is always sort of shy and nervous. There isn't anything particular about her presence in a room because that's not her character. She's supposed to be a regular girl thrown into a not so regular world. But Catherine is different. She owns the room. She's not shy, she's grand. Even when she's just standing, she does it with charisma. She's just in a power pose with a hand on her hip looking like a supermodel posing. Those distinctions are really important. I think to this day, nobody has ever showcased that skill better than Tatiana Maslany in Orphan Black. If you haven't seen Orphan Black, it's a thriller series about a woman named Sarah who finds out she's a clone. And throughout the show, as she unravels a whole conspiracy around her very birth, she gets to meet a number of her sister clones, and it gets insane. There are moments where Tatiana Maslany is playing like 7 or 8 characters in the same scene, and she somehow manages to make all of them feel different. They all feel like different people. Each of them has a different accent, speech pattern, a different posture, a different way to move, a different way to react, a different everything. Orphan Black as a show entirely relies on that very skill to work. If Tatiana can't make all these characters feel distinct and unique despite all of them having the same face and body, then the show falls apart. Another great example that directly relates to what they needed to do in the originals is in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Hermione takes a Polyjuice potion to turn into Bellatrix Lestrange. So Helena Bonham Carter, who plays Bellatrix, has a completely different job to do now. Because in these scenes, she's not playing Bellatrix Lestrange. She's playing Hermione Granger in Bellatrix's body, pretending to be Bellatrix. It's a completely different performance, and she fucking kills it. When you see these sequences, you can literally watch Helena Bonham Carter mimicking Emma Watson's mannerisms. Her walk, her constant fidgeting, the little sighs she does after she finishes a sentence, the way she stands. She even copies some of her facial expressions to a T, and it makes you feel like you're watching Hermione, even though it's a completely different face.
I wish to enter my vault.
You get my point. The essence of a character is incredibly important, and it was absolutely crucial to get the essence of Esther right for this story to make her work as an antagonist. But unfortunately, she just doesn't work, and it's a shame because she has such a big role in the season, especially when it comes to the twist that kickstarts the second half of the story. Because yeah, about halfway through the season, we find out that Esther is trying to turn her kids into witches, yes, to rid the world of vampires, but also to get them ready for a coming danger. And that coming danger is Dahlia, the real big bad of the season. But before we deal with that, we have to deal with a bunch of storylines that sometimes work and sometimes really don't work and mostly act as filler checkpoints. Hayley struggling with depression after having to give her baby away while dealing with the reality of being a hybrid is a really good plot point. Watching her give up her own humanity as she becomes a murder machine is really sad, but watching her come back from that thanks to Klaus convincing her that the only way to make it right is to reconnect with her humanity so they can stand by each other's side to defeat their enemies and bring their daughter home. I like that a lot. I love the idea that Klaus, of all people, brings the best out of Hayley. I think it fits their dynamic incredibly well.
You know, over the years, I've had my share of friends, enemies, lovers, losses and triumphs. With time, they all begin to run together. But you will find the real moments are vibrant.
I am glad that the show gets rid of the shitty werewolf storyline in the first episode of the season. I fucking couldn't stand it, and I wasn't down for that to carry over from season 1. But the entire Wolfpack story related to Hayley is really annoying. I never liked Jackson as a character. He's not even that bad, but I just don't like him. He's really boring and whiny and it annoys me. And I didn't like his blonde friend either. I forgot his name, but I didn't like him. He was annoying too. The whole storyline about Klaus's biological dad is a massive waste of time that is quite literally of no consequence in the entire show. I couldn't wait for this plot to be over. He's such a bad character anyway. I was glad when he was killed off. Anything to do with Davina puts me straight to sleep. Marcel rebuilding his vampire community from scratch is also surprisingly boring. I feel like Marcel really regresses as a character in this season. The story doesn't really have much space for him, so for most of it, he's just there doing a whole lot of nothing. Same goes for Camille, she just kind of exists. As soon as her storyline about her twin brother in season 1 ends, she's just kind of there. There is the famous Red Door storyline with Elijah, which is the first time we get to see the darker parts of his personality. And within this storyline, season 2 also sees Nina Dobrev appearing for one episode to play another Petrova doppelganger named Tatya, who had quite the bloody romance with Elijah and whose blood was used to create the first vampires. And then she just got bodied by Elijah. And of course, famously, this season decides not to write Rebecca out of the story when Claire Holt isn't here. Instead, the writers came up with a storyline where Rebecca's soul is put into another body, and Maisie Richardson Sellers takes over the role of Rebecca for most of the season. And while I'm not a big fan of the idea, because I think Claire Holt is just too good as Rebecca, Maisie actually does okay in the role. She mimics Rebecca's persona just enough that it still sort of feels like her, even though she is quite different at the same time. Like, it's not my favorite, but I'm okay with it. Anyways, so like I said, the real big bad of season 2 is Dahlia, the long-lost aunt of the originals. Dahlia is Esther's older sister, and she's basically the most powerful witch of all time, according to the show. I personally beg to differ, because if we look at the Vampire Diaries, Bonnie Bennett becomes so ridiculously powerful that she's technically a god by the end of the show. But whatever, let's pretend it's true for this season. While I really like the actress in this role, I unfortunately don't really enjoy Dahlia as a villain. She's not terrible per se, but she is incredibly one-note and she seriously lacks substance. Julie Plec likes all of her villains to have very deep motivations rather than being evil just for the sake of it, which is something I do like about her writing. She humanizes every single one of her villains to some degree. Sometimes she does it really well, and other times not so much. We're gonna talk about her later. And Dahlia easily falls into the not so much category. Basically, Dahlia's backstory is that her and Esther's family and village were killed by Vikings and they were then forced to live under their rule. But soon after, Esther met Michael and fell madly in love with him. Dahlia disapproved of Esther's relationship with Michael, but Esther didn't care and married him anyway, and Dahlia felt betrayed by that, so their relationship got strained. Dahlia ended up alone and vowed to never be weak again. But then, years later, after a long time of trying to have kids with Michael and failing, Esther decided to go to Dahlia and ask her for help to cast a fertility spell so she could get pregnant. Dahlia agreed to help, but warned her that such magic would require a great sacrifice. Desperate, but with nowhere else to turn, Esther blindly agreed to the terms. In exchange for casting the fertility spell on Esther, Dahlia would be given claim to Esther's firstborn child, as well as every firstborn child from every generation that followed for as long as Esther's bloodline should last. And that is when we find out that the firstborn Mikaelson, a girl named Freya, who everyone believed to have died of a sickness as a child, didn't actually die, but was given to Esther as a sacrifice. She was raised by Dahlia, who used her magic to make herself more powerful. That obviously never happened again because the Mikaelsons became vampires and were unable to have kids. But now, 1,000 years later, Haley gave birth to Klaus's daughter, the first biological child in the family and the firstborn child of the next generation of Mikaelsons. So Dahlia reappears after centuries and arrives in New Orleans with a grown-up Freya to claim Hope Mikaelson, a baby that, by the magical pact she made with her sister, belongs to her. Yeah, it's just not a great story, is it? I just don't love it. I feel like with all the complexity we got with the different characters of season 1, this feels like such a downgrade thematically. This season seriously lacks the game of chess aspect of season 1 that made it so compelling. This story feels more like the later seasons of the Vampire Diaries. It's a whole lot of supernatural mumbo jumbo that doesn't really mean anything. It's way too convoluted. The show keeps breaking its own rules, and honestly, it's just kind of boring. But with all that said, thankfully, just like season 1, the season's shortcomings are entirely saved by the ending. When it's established that defeating Dahlia by trying to take her in a fight is not a viable option, the last 2 episodes finally get to the point where it is clear the only way to beat her is to outsmart her. And this is where it gets interesting. Klaus's final long con of a plan to outsmart Dahlia and defeat her in episode 21 is easily the best part of the season, and I think that is a great use of Klaus as a character. I find something incredibly interesting in the idea of Klaus taking advantage of his own flaws to defeat his enemies. After being betrayed by Elijah, who daggers him after wrongfully accusing him of some atrocity, Klaus is saved by Dahlia and he allies himself with her to take revenge on Elijah and the others. He acts out of rage to get back at every single member of his family, and at Dahlia's side, he goes on a visceral rampage. And holy shit, it is quite a rampage. He kills Elijah's girlfriend, he curses Haley to force her to remain in wolf form, he murders every single one of Marcel's vampires, again, wiping out the whole community he just rebuilt. He daggers Elijah, he compels Marcel to kidnap Rebecca, he kills Camille, and he then essentially forces Rebecca to commit suicide in her mortal body. Like, bro, my guy just went sicko mode. He didn't have to go that hard. And once that revenge is done, he actually leads Dahlia to his daughter to hand her over. The episode is bloody, it's action-packed, and incredibly tense. We get to see Klaus at his most savage as he executes a plan that is completely irredeemable and beyond anything we've seen him do before. And then comes the twist. The episode ends with Klaus's real plan being revealed after he leads Dahlia to hope. See, Klaus didn't actually kill Camille. He only attacked her to be able to discreetly transmit her a message via telepathy, giving her the details of his plan. He only daggered Elijah because he knew Camille would wake him up right after. He compelled Marcel to kidnap Rebecca because he knew Marcel would do anything in his power to not hurt her, and he trapped Rebecca into killing herself because he knew she would wake up in her original body with the full might of an original vampire. Basically, he managed to get his entire family out of danger while convincing Dahlia that he was loyal to her. And because Klaus is known for being a volatile, murderous psychopath, she believed it without a thought. Klaus literally weaponized his shortcomings to become the perfect double agent. But what I also like, though, is the fact that his plan is great, but not perfect. The whole idea is to convince Dahlia that he has gone unhinged and actually turned against his family. So he faked all of those attacks, yes, but not everything about them was fake. In order to convince Dahlia of his turn, to convince her it was real, he had to create genuine collateral damage to go with his plan. He actually killed Elijah's girlfriend. That was not a trick, she's dead as fuck. He actually did murder every single one of Marcel's vampires, and he actually did curse Haley to be trapped in her wolf form. So while he did outsmart Dahlia and saved his entire family from a seemingly inevitable death, everybody still hates Klaus because his plan had very big and very real consequences. And more specifically, in classic Niklaus fashion, his plan had very real consequences for everyone except for him. He saved his daughter, overpowered Dahlia, and rescued every single one of his family members, but he also killed every single one of his family's loved ones, leaving them completely alone. And he also forced Rebecca to abandon her mortal body to become an original again, which means she once more had to abandon her dream of finding love and having children because of him. So, in a theme that is very consistent with the rest of the show, Klaus's victory came at a cost.
All I know is Klaus will do whatever he has to do for
Klaus will do whatever he has to do for Klaus. Now, Haley is not answering her phone. Now, what has he done? This was punishment.
Punishment, whatever for. Perhaps the dagger you put in my heart.
You brought that upon yourself.
Episodes 21 and 22 of Season 2 are easily some of the best episodes of the entire show. It does a great job at showcasing Klaus as the absolute fucking menace he is. It's also by far the most effective display of how his mind works. Like I said, Klaus is a master tactician, and over 1,000 years, he has won countless wars. He literally never lost. He's basically Melania from Elden Ring.
I am Melania, Blade of Miquella. And I have never known defeat.
Esther comes back in the finale, this time played by her original actress Alice Evans, who, by the way, this is a complete tangent off script, but while working on this video, I wanted to see what else Alice Evans had done after the originals, because I liked her a lot in the originals. So I looked her up online, and holy shit! What I ended up finding was some of the most unexpected, unhinged shit I've ever seen. Alice Evans has not acted in anything since the originals, and her life has apparently been a complete mess since then. And I don't want to speculate too much about people's real lives, but holy hell, the things I read. She was apparently married to the guy from Fantastic Four, Johan something, I don't remember his name. But these two are having one of the most insane and overly public divorces I've ever heard about. It's a fucking train wreck, and from what I understand, it's been ongoing since like 2019. There's been this whole thing about Anna posting drunk videos on social media, going on endless drunken rants on Twitter and Instagram, just obsessing over her ex-husband and his new girlfriend for years on end. There's allegedly a very extensive story of abuse with her, to the point where her ex-husband was granted a restraining order against her by a court for harassment and abuse. Apparently there were a bunch of threats involved in this, and then she violated that restraining order and she was almost arrested. She's been filmed completely losing her shit on a bunch of strangers in a public parking lot.
What the fuck are you parking here for? We're all trying to find a place, and then you're like, my car, I'm trying to get in there. It's horrible. That's a horrible thing to do. This is a massive gas guzzling car, and you're in a compact space. That's not right. You're over onto the edge of my car.
You ran into my car and you hit that person's car. Do you see your black mark?
You shouted at me. Big old posh gas guzzling car snooty woman, and me in my bashed up Prius, and you're like, oh no. It's not bashed. It says compact.
This goes on for a while. And since then, like very recently, she has turned to social media once more, this time to create a GoFundMe because she claims to be completely broke and unable to afford basic needs like food. Like, it's fucking wild. Like, I'm not a person who's really interested in celebrity lives or stuff like that. That's just never really been my cup of tea. But this was just so unexpected, and I found myself so shocked, I ended up going through this entire rabbit hole on the internet for a whole night reading about this. It's just a complete 180 I never saw coming. Like, for me, it was just as shocking and unexpected as when I found out that Matt Davis, the man who played Alaric in The Vampire Diaries, is actually a Republican extremist who is very, very openly racist and goes on Twitter to threaten people over his political beliefs, and he's telling people to go to his house so he can shoot them. Like, dude, what? Are you good? Are you drinking enough water? But yeah, end of the parenthesis, I guess. I was just trying to see what Alice Evans had been doing since the originals. And apparently the answer is nothing. She hasn't been in anything since 2015 when she ended her run in the originals. Anyway, back to Esther. I completely killed the vibe. One of my favorite moments in the season 2 finale is Esther's final confrontation with Dahlia. Esther, who has wanted and tried to destroy her children for literal centuries because she thinks vampires are abominations that should have never been created, sees Dahlia actually on the verge of killing Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca. She watches as they slowly die by her sister's hand. And like, that's exactly what she wanted. If they die, this is it. She wins too. But in the end, Esther panics and can't bear to see them actually die. So she confronts Dahlia and stands up for her children, ending her own story by sacrificing herself to save their lives. I think it goes incredibly well with the never-ending cycle theme of the originals. They're a family made of people who constantly hate each other and want to kill one another, but they also love each other too much to actually go through with it. They will torment each other for centuries on end, but they will never be able to bring themselves to give the final blow. Because in the end, love is stronger than hate. Dahlia is defeated, and the originals are finally free from both of their parents. They lost a part of their family, but in the process, they also gained a sister, Freya, who ended up abandoning Dahlia to reunite with her family. No one is completely sure they should trust her yet, and the season ends with every relationship in the show being effectively fractured, and the future has never looked more uncertain. So overall, just like season 1, season 2 is mainly dragged down by the fact that it feels way too long for the story it's trying to tell, and this season's pacing is kinda just as bad as season 1. Despite feeling slow and quite messy at points, season 2's story flows much better from episode to episode. The issue is simply that the story isn't that interesting. However, the season is 100% saved by its amazing ending. The last 2 episodes are fucking fire. It's almost annoying how good these 2 episodes are given how mediocre the season is as a whole. It's not the worst season by any means, but it's definitely not good. But again, episodes 21 and 22 really come to carry the rest of the season on their backs. Klaus ending the finale by telling a fairy tale version of the season to Hope, the same way Rebecca did in the premiere to recap season 1, is really cute and a great way to remind the audience that they are doing all of this for Hope.
You got me feeling mellow. You think I'm acting ghetto. You're weird like Jared Leto.
Season 3 of the originals is really good. No, like, really, it's ridiculously awesome. This season has no business being as badass as it is. And it's a fun surprise for me because I initially stopped watching the originals a couple of episodes into season 3. I'm not quite sure I remember why I stopped watching, because it's been like 9 years. Maybe I felt burnt out after season 2, but whatever, it doesn't matter. So this is uncharted territory for me. The first 2 seasons were a rewatch, but from this point on, this is my first time watching the originals, and I went in completely blind. Season 3 picks up a few months after the events of season 2, and it starts with Klaus actually living a quiet, trouble-less life. He's given up on being king of New Orleans or the big bad wolf of the supernatural world. He kinda left that life behind and is just enjoying being a dad. He spends his time painting, wandering around the town, and in a way that's kinda surprising for Klaus, he's generally happy, and he's actually a kind, loving father. Well, I didn't see that coming. However, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. His family is completely divided as a result of his violent plan against Dahlia in the previous season. Elijah hates him because he murdered his girlfriend. Marcel's vampire community was eradicated by Klaus, so he's alone again. Rebecca is off trying to find a way to bring Cole back to life, and of course, Haley was cursed by Klaus to live in wolf form except for the full moon, when she gets a few hours in human form, hours she takes advantage of to spend time with Hope. Vincent Griffith, the witch who was possessed by Finn Michelson, has gotten his life back, and he's not very happy with what New Orleans has become. Davina has become the leader of the witches, but she's struggling to get respect from the different communities, yada yada yada, whatever, nobody cares about Davina. Clearly, there is still a lot of tension in New Orleans. once. Klaus doesn't care anymore and is only interested in taking care of his daughter, but despite his differences with his brother, he soon has to stand by his side when a bizarre series of events becomes impossible to ignore. A mysterious series of murders in the French Quarter is making people ask questions. Klaus is visited by an old friend named Lucien, who seems to make him very nervous, and Elijah is confronted to a terrifying reality about the vampire world when another old friend arrives in town. And before they know it, the originals are confronted to an enigmatic conspiracy and a dangerous prophecy that might just signify their end. Now, if there is one thing the originals is really good at, it's genre switching. I think very few shows can do it well, but the originals really makes it work. Despite its narrative shortcomings, I think this show has done an incredible job at reinventing itself in every season, and doing it in a way that always makes sense. Yes, sometimes the story sucks, but the genre shifts always feel very natural. Season 1 is pretty much a dark political thriller that gives it almost the image of a TV universe take on Game of Thrones. Season 2 is a supernatural family drama, and Season 3 plays out more like a crime thriller with what is essentially a take on an old school mafia mob boss movie like The Godfather. Except instead of the actual mafia, you have an ancient secret society of vampires butting heads with their makers. Because yes, this entire season is about sire lines. Basically, Lucien Castle, the mysterious vampire that visits Klaus, turns out to be the very first vampire to ever be turned. After the originals, he is the oldest vampire of all time. My guy is old as shit. He was turned 8,000 years ago by Klaus on accident because the Michelsons didn't even know they could make other people vampires yet. And he tracks down Klaus in New Orleans in present day because a witch who is loyal to him had a vision of a prophecy that is predicting the fall of the originals, more specifically of Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca. The prophecy says that all three of them will die, causing the extinction of the vampire species. One will fall by the hand of a friend, one will fall by the hand of a foe, and one will fall by the hand of family. So, the three oldest non-original vampires in the world, that were each turned by one of the siblings, are making their way to New Orleans to protect the original that sired them, because if one of them dies, hundreds of thousands of vampires will die with them. Klaus turned Lucien, who comes to town to protect him from any harm that could come his way, even though he kinda hates Klaus. Elijah turned a vampire named Tristan, who is at the head of the ancient secret society of very old, extremely powerful vampires known as the Strix. And Rebecca turned Tristan's sister, Aurora. Nope, not this one. This Aurora, who suffers from an extreme case of bipolar personality disorder and is viewed as widely unstable due to how powerful she is. It's explained since the Vampire Diaries that vampires feel emotions way more intensely than regular mortals, so I assume the idea here is that her BPD is multiplied by like 1,000,000. Oh, and Aurora also happens to be Klaus's first love. Season 3 is the season that probably makes the best use of lore in the entire Vampire Diaries universe. Having a parallel flashback storyline set 1,000 years ago, where we get to see the Michelsons as, at the time, the only vampires in existence, is just a brilliant idea. Watching them figuring out the extent of their powers is such an interesting story point, and it makes for great dramatic tension between the characters. Finding out how the Michelsons realized they could turn other people into vampires was really fun, but mostly learning that Elijah caused one of Klaus's defining heartbreaks by accidentally convincing his first love to hate him because he didn't understand he had the power to compel people was just great thinking on the writer's part. The way this plays out in the present day with Klaus finding out Elijah's secret makes for insanely compelling drama. It's just amazing. The twist that the three oldest vampires hate the originals because 1,000 years ago they ran from Michael, who had tracked them down and compel the three to believe they were the originals to throw Michael off. Man, that was some of the most impactful use of vampire powers. Because yeah, Lucian, Tristan, and Aurora spent hundreds of years on the run from someone who was never even looking for them. They actually thought they were Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca. That shit is so brutal, man. They were literally robbed of several lifetimes. This season is so good. The story is so fucking cool, man. It is such a sharp step up from the previous season. It's not perfect, but God, there is so much about this season I'm willing to let slide because it is just that good. I think my biggest problem with season 3 is mostly that it introduces a bunch of new characters and I don't really like any of them. Just like the Vampire Diaries, after a while the original suffers from being way too crowded for no reason. Lucian Castle is one of my least favorite characters in the show. I really don't like him. I don't like the detective guy that's always hanging out with Cammy. Tristan and Aurora kinda suck ass. Aurora specifically is very one note and kind of annoying. Like, I really don't like these characters, but I tolerate them because the conflict they bring to the table is admittedly very interesting. But while the new characters are by far the season's most glaring weakness, the biggest strength of the season is how it improves on the old characters in the show. I was not a big fan of Freya in season 2, but this season manages to fix her and actually makes her somewhat likable. She really starts to feel like a true part of the family, and she develops way more of a chemistry with the other Michelsons. Marcel is also at his absolute best in season 3. He might be the MVP of the season, to be honest. He has so many great emotional moments, and most of the time he's displaying just straight, unhinged badassery. It feels really good because he really did take a backseat in season 2, but this season, Marcel just fucking rocks, and his story takes turns I didn't really see coming. Camille also has a much better storyline this season, which is kind of surprising because I never really cared for her. Again, after the storyline with her twin brother in season 1, the show really struggles to make Camille relevant to the story of the originals. She's always just kind of there, and it looks like they realized that because in season 3, they really work to make her an integral part of the story. Hailey is on her shit as well. Her storyline this time around is surprisingly dark and tragic. It takes turn I didn't see coming, and while I didn't love all of her arc, I do like how her character is this season. I love how they handled her. Klaus obviously is still amazing this season, and by this point you can tell the writers have just figured him out to a T. His character development in season 3 is very interesting and feels like a very good payoff on the path season 1 sent him on. And Elijah is also great this season. We get to see a more personal side of him that is detached from his direct involvement with the family, which is interesting because usually his entire character is about family. I do have one major gripe with this amazing story though, and that's an issue I have with the show overall, and is the fact that in the originals, the authority, power, and legitimacy of the original vampires is too easily contested all the time. Let me explain what I mean. In the Vampire Diaries, it's essentially sold to us that the originals are so incredibly powerful that the world shakes at the mention of their names. They're basically invincible gods, a ruthless family that is known to show no mercy, and the entire vampire world lives in fear of them. Everyone is so afraid of the originals, nobody would ever dare crossing them. We even learned that some vampires have been living their entire lives on the run from them for hundreds of years because of how terrified they are of them. Catherine Pierce, one of the most powerful, badass, and intelligent vampires in recorded history, lived on the run from them for 500 years. The Michelsons are presented to us as somewhat of a vicious royal family whose name alone is enough to make most people kneel. They're supposed to be invincible. The only person who can make them flinch is supposed to be Michael. In season 2 of the Vampire Diaries, Elena, Damon, Stefan, and company are pretty much meant to be the first people in centuries who managed to go toe-to-toe with the originals, let alone give them trouble. And not only that, they only go against one of them, Klaus, with the help of another original, Elijah, and they lose anyway. way! They can't even manage to defeat him. Like, basically, the Michaelsons are meant to be the boogeyman of the supernatural world. But in the originals, it's kinda not the case anymore. People are not afraid of the originals, like, at all. It's like, out of nowhere, everybody wants the smoke. When the show established in the very first episode that Klaus founded New Orleans himself, I thought that him coming back was gonna make everybody terrified. But no, nobody respects the Michaelsons. They spend the entire show being insulted with little to no fear. Everybody is contesting their authority. Nobody takes them seriously. There are scenes where 20-year-old vampires are like getting in Klaus's face trying to scare him off and shit. Vampires come from all around the world throughout the show and nobody gives a shit about the originals. Everybody thinks they can beat them. People are constantly threatening them and shit. Like, I don't like it. It's easily one of the major flaws of the show is that it kind of ruins the mysticism and legendary status behind the originals. Now they just seem like people who view themselves as grand beings, but nobody seems to be taking it seriously. And it's something that particularly bothers me in season 3, because it's the season that truly showcases the extent and the insane scope of the world the originals allowed to exist. I personally think it takes away from what the story of the season could have been, but it's okay because the season is still amazing. The mid-season finale of season 3 is a Christmas episode and it is fucking awesome. The final twist is impeccably executed. After 2 seasons of will they, won't they energy, Klaus and Camille finally admit their feelings for each other and they do some stuff that you would probably see on Pornhub. It's played as a big moment that is very happy for the characters. It is symbolic of Klaus finally allowing himself to be happy and in love. But what he doesn't know, and what the audience doesn't know, is that much earlier, Camille was compelled by Aurora, who was jealous of Klaus's affection for her. Aurora compelled Camille to slit her own throat if Klaus ever confesses his love to her. And so, the mid-season finale ends with Klaus waking up after his first night with Camille, and he finds her dead in the bed next to him. Did I mention this season is really good? The second half of the season is admittedly where it starts to lose steam a little though. Once the mob boss type story ends with the defeat of Tristan in episode 10 or 11, the show kinda goes back to its less focused, messier, supernatural drama stuff. It doesn't get bad per se, but there is a noticeable dip in the writing and the pacing. Again, just an inconvenience of being bound to 22 episodes a season, but it's okay because in typical TVDU fashion, things kind of pick up again for the couple of episodes leading up to the finale. Episode 20 in particular is incredibly good. Lucian becoming an enhanced original is something that I don't particularly like as a storyline, but everything set around it fucking rocks. And I think one of the big reasons why this season works so well is because the stakes feel real. I've talked about it before, but one of the biggest issues in the TVD universe is that death kind of means nothing. People die and come back to life dozens of times, if not hundreds, so it's impossible to feel anything when a character dies. But this season tries something different. It goes for killing off certain characters permanently, and it makes this season way more impactful as a result. Camille dies for good in season 3, which I did not expect to see. It turns out that before compelling her to kill herself to spite Klaus, Aurora gave her blood to Cammy, so after Klaus finds her dead, she wakes up in transition, which then leads to episode 10, the mid-season premiere, which is a fantastic moral dilemma during which Cammy and Klaus argue over whether she should complete the transition and become a vampire. Quick context for those who don't know. In the Vampire Diaries universe, in order to become a vampire, you have to die with vampire blood in your system. So you have to be fed the blood of a vampire and then die. Once you're dead, the vampire blood takes over and brings you back to life, except you're not really alive, but you're also not really dead. You're in transition. You're like in a state that is somewhere between life and death. In order to complete the transition, you have to drink human blood within 24 hours of you waking up. Once that blood enters your system, the transition is finished and you become a vampire. But if you don't drink human blood within 24 hours, you just die again, and this time you don't wake up. So the entire episode follows Cammy and Klaus as they butt heads over what her fate should be. Cammy absolutely does not want to become a vampire. She considers that she's dead and she wants to wait out the 24 hours so she can go and find peace. Klaus, however, disagrees. He is ready to do anything for Cammy to stay alive, and if she has to be a vampire, so be it. Cammy wants to die and Klaus wants her to live. Klaus believes letting her die when there is a clear chance for her to live a life is insane, but Cammy thinks it is unethical for Klaus to take that choice away from her. It's an insanely interesting debate about the way we perceive the value of life, but in the end, after some classic shenanigans, Cammy realizes she can use her power to help New Orleans if she completes the transition, and she decides to feed. So Cammy becomes a vampire. It doesn't really work out though, she turns into a little bit of a psycho, and 9 episodes later, she is killed again, this time for real by Lucian's lethal bite. Klaus sits with her on her deathbed, and they exchange some powerful words, and then she dies. And that's it! That is the end of Camille's story. The show never comes back on that decision. Her death is permanent. I will say though, there has been some speculation that Camille might have been killed off at the request of actress Leah Pipes, who wanted to leave. If you don't know the story, the character of Camille was absolutely hated by the fandom, and if you don't know, the Vampire Diaries fandom has a bit of a reputation for being particularly toxic. There are so many stories about the fandom doing the most insane shit. One of my favorites being the series finale of the Vampire Diaries causing an absolute uproar online because Damon and Elena kiss at the end. And no, by the way, the uproar was not because the fans didn't like them as a couple. Some fans tried to cancel Ian Somerhalder after the finale because in real life, he has a wife. And they thought it was rude and confusing that he would kiss another woman on screen when he has a wife. Anyway, during her time on the show, Leah Pipes was having a bit of trouble with the fans, and it really got out of hand during production of season 3. The reason why is because the show establishes a very strong romantic tension between her character Camille and Klaus, and fans really did not like that. See, the Vampire Diaries fandom is very obsessed with their ships. And one of the ships they love more than any other is the Claraline ship, the romantic relationship between Klaus and Caroline Forbes from the original show. I talked about how that ship never made sense to me in my Vampire Diaries video, but people were obsessed with them. And so, when the original started setting up another romantic interest for Klaus, fans started to lose their fucking minds. Basically, they hated Cammy so much because in their eyes, she was the one coming between Klaus and Caroline, and for some reason, that anger and outrage was entirely directed at the actress, because I guess logic is not something they have. Leah Pipes started getting harassed online quite brutally. Her socials were constantly plagued with insults and general animosity from the fans. It was kind of insane, honestly, and this insanity reached its peak in episode 9 of season 3, when Klaus and Camille finally get together. The wave of backlash Leah got online was so excessive and insane that she reacted to it publicly for the very first time. Thousands of people were insulting her, cursing her, they were calling her ugly, they sent her death threats, and soon after, Leah got particularly triggered by a tweet from a fan that wished her to die from cancer. She responded to it and defended herself. Julie Plec also came to her defense on Twitter with the fury of 1,000 suns. Funny that she never had that same energy when it was Kat Graham being bullied, but whatever. She posted a very long series of tweets condemning the fans' behavior. It was a fucking shit show that resulted with more death threats and more toxicity. All of that, again, because 2 fictional characters kissed instead of 2 other fictional characters. You guys are fucking embarrassing. And 9 episodes later, well after the mid-season hiatus, which would coincide with the production timeline, Camille was killed off the show, which led people to ask if Leah Pipes decided to leave the show as a result of all the harassment getting out of hand and asked to be written off. I don't know what the answer is, but either way, Camille's storyline leading up to her death in episode 19 was really solid. It's by far her best time on the show, and I think the character gets a really good exit. Davina also dies in season 3 in a way that was absolutely shocking. I couldn't believe they went for something so dark, because she doesn't die a quiet and overly emotional death with long speeches like they do with important characters in these shows. Nope, her death is fucking brutal, and she dies screaming and terrified. Like seriously, the way she dies is really fucking sinister, and the description of what happened to her is even worse. Basically, she finds herself in limbo and her soul is ripped apart, shredded into nothingness by her own elders. It's so messed up. I never liked Davina as a character, but when she died, I actually felt sorry for her because she didn't deserve to go like that, and that's the whole point. That's what makes it so tragic. It was easily one of the most memorable deaths in the entire TVD universe, but unfortunately I can't count it as impactful because they bring her back to life in season 4 in the stupidest and most unearned way imaginable. But the permanent deaths in the season, even Jackson, who dies brutally at the hand of Tristan, are all quite memorable. And then, as always, the season finale is just incredible. The Michelsons realized that the friend the prophecy warned them about was none other than Marcel, who, after the death of Davina, goes fucking ballistic, and he takes the last vial of magic serum thing that turns him into an enhanced original. He is now the only vampire more powerful than the originals, but when he goes and tries to confront Klaus about Davina's death being his fault, Elijah panics and kills Marcel.
I am nothing less than your worst.
But they didn't know Marcel was an enhanced original, so he can't be killed that way. He comes back to life and now decides the originals deserve no mercy. He takes back control of the French Quarter and makes himself king again. He eradicates the Styx. His bite is now lethal to originals, so he bites Cole, Elijah, and Rebecca, but they're saved by Freya at the last second. And then he puts Klaus on trial in front of every vampire in the city. Everybody gets to expose how Klaus ruined their lives over centuries, how he killed their families for fun. Even Rebecca jumps in to try and save Klaus at first, until a magical issue that messes with her brain makes her unable to ignore her hatred for him. It's a 15-minute sequence where everyone is acting their asses off.
As you burned her mother alive.
Yes. My sins were terrible indeed. But they taught the world to fear me, and that fear protected my family.
Don't preach to me about family. I was your family once, or so you said. And where did that get me?
I could have left you nameless and alone, but I didn't. I took you, and I made you all that you are.
And here's the thing, Marcel's reason for doing what he does are not treated as a stupid villainous arc. All of the reasons he has for wanting to get rid of the originals are perfectly logical, and everything he says when he explains to them why they need to die actually makes sense. He's kind of right. Even in the scenes that play out, Klaus and Elijah are losing the argument. They don't know what to say, because deep down they know Marcel is right.
It seems you're always willing to watch the world burn, long as you survive.
Lucian had to die. He would have destroyed us all.
Yeah, thanks to his vendetta against you.
His motive is not the issue. He was a threat. We responded in kind. Had Freya the power to kill Lucian and save Davina, she would have.
Am I supposed to just nod and accept that? We share a bourbon and I just shrug it off.
You hand it over right now, and I will forgive this act of defiance as a moment of weakness brought on by your grief.
Oh, that's funny. I thought you came asking for my forgiveness, but you like it better this way, don't you? Me owing you, and all that pretty fairy tale about me being part of the family? That only works if you're in control.
And it's the same with the trial sequence, even if this time it is met with glorious Michelson pride, which makes for one of the genuinely best scenes in the entire show. And oh my god. Klaus's monologue where he rejects the authority of the trial is fucking unbelievable, and Joseph Morgan plays it with an insane amount of gravitas.
Look at you. Outraged over the loss of Davina, she who routinely betrayed my family. And in the end, defied even you. Perhaps you should have warned her what befalls those who cross me. Maybe what happened to her was your fault. No matter. Each and every one of you stands here today because I willed it to be so. This mockery of a trial is allowed only because of me. And your very immortality is a gift from me. A debt that you can never repay. One that far offsets all of my supposed crimes. I owe you nothing.
God damn it, man. Joseph Morgan is fucking spectacular in this role. Despite Klaus's incredible speech, though, Marcel has become too strong, and as punishment, he decides to dagger Klaus with the Tunde blade, a special dagger that doesn't put you in a coma, but instead tortures you from the inside while your body is unable to move. It is described as the worst possible pain to feel, and Klaus is sentenced to be daggered by this blade and suffer for eternity, because death is too good for him. And so, after 1,000 years, Klaus Mikaelson, the king of vampires, is defeated. And I gotta say, I love it. The execution of this whole thing is so fucking well done, man. The idea that Marcel Gerard, the one who was raised by the Mikaelsons, grows to become the only person in history that was actually able to defeat them is pretty fucking amazing as a plot point. And the fact that he had to become worse than an original to achieve that further proves how much nobody can truly escape them.
The king is dead. The king is dead, or hail the king.
Season 3 of the originals is fucking crazy. It has a bit of a slow point in the second half, but that aside, fuck me, man, this season is so good. It might be one of my favorite seasons of any CW show. I'm almost mad that I stopped watching the show right when it got this good. It's the writing at its best, the characters at their best, the lore at its best, the acting at its best, the tension, the stakes, everything about this season is just peak. If anything, season 3 alone is the reason why watching this show is worth it. Okay, let's talk about the bad stuff now.
You got me feeling mellow. You think I'm acting ghetto. You're weird like Jared Leto.
Alright, we're drawing a sharp line in the sand here because this is where the show completely shifts. Before this, I knew absolutely nothing about the last 2 seasons of the show. I had no idea what happened in them, and just like season 3, I went in completely blind. I think we could consider that seasons 4 and 5 really are parts 1 and 2 of the same story, which is why I'm putting them in the same chapter. It's the final arc of the show, and right off the bat, this feels like a completely different show. Where season 3 was kind of a mob boss story, season 4 evolves into more of a gothic horror. And to my surprise, from the jump, the story completely changes the status quo. Season 4 picks up 5 years after the events of season 3. Marcel defeated the Mikaelsons at the end of the last episode. He's now king of New Orleans once again, and he's managed to keep the peace in the quarter. After news of the originals being defeated spread around the world, a new holiday was created in town where, once a year, vampires from around the world come to New Orleans to celebrate the downfall of Klaus Mikaelson and his eternal suffering through the Tunde blade. The truth, though, is that Klaus is no longer under the suffering of the Tunde Day Blade. Marcel freed him from it and is now keeping him locked in a magical prison under his old home, where he is sentenced to an eternal life of solitude. And also, the originals are not exactly defeated. Last season, Freya saved her siblings by tying their life energy to Klaus's. They are now in a form of enchanted sleep in coffins hidden somewhere they cannot be found by Marcel. Haley, who has been in hiding with Hope for all these years, finds a way to wake them up, and so she leaves to find the coffins and brings them back to the world of the living. Once they're awake, the Michaelsons immediately decide to go on a mission to rescue Klaus. And while all of that is happening, Vincent is confronted to a terrifying monster of his past when children of the community suddenly go missing. And as he investigates, he realizes that an ancient dark entity known as the Hollow has returned, and a dangerous cult linked to it has arrived in New Orleans. Yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Season 4 is kinda mid. It's not like unwatchable or painful to get through, like it's not season 7 of The Vampire Diaries. It's just sort of lame. It's whatever. It has its moments, but it's very bloated. A lot of it is boring and uneventful. The characters are not at their best at all. Everything about it is really forgettable. Like, this season just doesn't work. I'm gonna go through the next 2 seasons very quickly because there isn't that much to say about them, but it's a very sharp downfall from the brilliance of season 3, and it's very hard not to notice. And I'm just gonna cut to the chase. One of the main reasons why season 4 doesn't work is simply the villain. The Hollow is just the dumbest concept as a villain, and I think it might just be the worst villain in the Vampire Diaries universe. I mean, don't quote me on this because I haven't seen Legacies yet, but I have a feeling it's gonna be hard to do worse. Yes, I hate Silas Moore. I will always hate Silas Moore. He's an awful villain and overall just a poorly conceived character, but at least Silas was a physical presence with motivations. I cannot express how stupid it is that Klaus and his family spend the entire season fighting a blue light orb that can possess people. That's so fucking stupid. Basically, a bunch of shit happens that's not really relevant or anything. It turns out that the Hollow is actually a Native American witch named Inadu, who was born like 500 years before Christ, and she literally has no point. She has no personality, she barely ever speaks, she has no motivations or gravitas, fucking nothing. The only thing we are told about her is that from the moment she was born a long time ago, she craved power. Wow. That apparently scared her tribe, so they killed her, but she became even more powerful as a spirit, and so she haunted the tribes. Oh, and that's it, by the way. This wasn't the setup for her story. This is her entire story. This is the most you ever learn about her. The Hollow is a spirit that wants more power because of reasons. Then she comes back in her human form towards the end of the season and just nothing. This villain is empty as shit. Remember when I said Julie Plec is really good at giving deeper emotional motivations to humanize her villains? Yeah, they completely skipped that step here. The Hollow is literally evil just because we don't even know what she wants. Her followers keep saying that her power is mighty and that it will keep them safe from anyone who tries to stop them. Okay, sure, but stop them from doing what? What's her plan here? We never find out what any of you idiots are actually trying to do. The Hollow wants to possess Hope. Okay, but why? What's the end goal? What is happening? It's like the writers completely forgot to give this villain any substance. As it stands, the Hollow is not really a character. She's more of an idea that feels very incomplete. This entire season revolves around a villain that literally does not have a point. That's so fucking boring. But it's not to say that season 4 doesn't have anything interesting to offer. Like, it has its moments here and there. I do like that this season kind of flips the dynamic of the main brothers. Elijah is kind of the barbaric monster this season, while Klaus is now more mature since losing Cammy and since being reunited with his daughter, and he's way more reasonable in his approaches. Because yeah, we get some brutal shit in this story. This season features Elijah murdering kids. Are you having fun yet? I gotta admit, even for this show, that's kinda metal. Season 4 also has some solid emotional moments. The scene where Marcel meets Hope for the very first time is actually very sweet. She's basically his little sister, and now he's seeing her for the first time at an age where she can have a conversation. And it's a scene that reminds you that in the middle of all this violence, Marcel is kind of a chill guy with a big heart. I like that he has an honest conversation about Klaus with her and tells her that no matter how much he tries to hate Klaus, he cannot bring himself to not love him. It's really sweet. Season 4 has these little gems here and there that really stand out, but it also has a lot of really questionable shit. Freya is given a very awkward romance with a new character named Keelan. It is quite literally a Stockholm Syndrome story. Freya kidnaps Keelan at the beginning of the season and subjects her to immense torture to steal her werewolf venom, and Keelan ends up falling in love with her, and then they date for a while. It's not great, especially if we're trying to give some representation to interracial queer relationships on television, but at least it doesn't last too long. Oh no, they're together for the rest of the show and they're having a kid at the end? Okay, well fuck me then. I mean, either way, the Vampire Diaries universe is very known for the fact that it has very questionable romantic plot lines that very creepily blur the lines when it comes to consent. Let's just say this franchise doesn't have the greatest track record with morality in its love stories. Davina coming back to life after having one of the most impactful death scenes in the entire TVD universe is one of the worst decisions this show has ever made. It's cheap and incredibly disappointing, especially because they bring her back literally for no reason. Because right after she's resurrected, Davina just leaves the show. And then we only hear about her through brief mentions that are completely pointless and unimportant. She becomes a perpetually off-screen character, and so my question is, why bring her back at all? This season is weird as fuck. Thankfully though, this season wins a lot of points by the fact that it doesn't drag as much as the first 3. The pacing is tighter and way more effective, and that's probably just because it only has 13 episodes instead of 22. And then the season ends with Klaus, Elijah, Rebecca, and Cole making a big move to save Hope from being possessed by the Hollow. Vincent uses old magic to split the Hollow spirit in 4 and seal each part of it in the 4 originals. And to make sure she never returns, all 4 of them have to leave New Orleans and live as far away from each other as humanly possible. They can never reunite again. They can never see each other again. If they do, the Hollow will be able to stitch itself back together, and apparently that's bad news. So that's what they do. The originals split and leave New Orleans, but before leaving, Elijah asks Marcel to compel him to forget about his entire family, because he thinks if Klaus goes on a rampage, he is gonna be too tempted to save his soul and will try to find him. Oh my god, this season is really stupid. So Marcel wipes his memory and sends him on his way, and the originals are now separated for life. Honestly, that's kind of it. There isn't much more to say about season 4. It's the most forgettable season of the show. The finale is one of the worst episodes of the show, which was particularly disappointing because the show's finales usually slap. But yeah, that's it. This season is just one big ol' sigh. And from there, we head to the final season of the show. The final season of the originals is by far the worst. There is no debate here. This season is absolutely awful. It is just a never-ending cesspool of bad decisions, and it is somehow even more boring than season 4. And that's saying something because season 4 is a fucking snooze fest. And while season 4 had some redeeming qualities to it that made it sort of tolerable, this season is a little bit harder to defend. It's the final 13 episodes of the show, and like I said earlier, it very much is a part 2 of the story of season 4. Seasons 4 and 5 really do feel like one season that was split in 2. So yeah, let's talk about it. Season 5 is basically a whodunit murder mystery of some sort. It picks up 7 years after the events of season 4. New Orleans is living in peace and harmony under the watch of Vincent, Josh, Freya, and Haley. Klaus and Haley's daughter Hope is now a teenager. She goes to Alaric's bootleg Hogwarts school for kids with powers and shit, and she's a little bit of a problem child. She gets suspended from her school after agreeing to turn another student into a vampire. Meanwhile, the Michaelsons are are still scattered around the world, unable to have any proximity with each other. Rebecca now lives in New York City with Marcel, Cole is living in the Caribbean with perpetually off-screen Davina, they're apparently married now, but who cares? Elijah is in Paris with no memory of who he is, and Klaus is also in Paris, way too close to Elijah, and word has gone around the vampire world that he has completely lost his mind. Nobody ever hears from him, and he hasn't talked to his daughter in 7 years. But the world is quiet, the peace is palpable, but it doesn't last long. Things quickly take a turn when Klaus tries to call Haley, but her phone is answered by Hope, who tells him that Haley has mysteriously gone missing. Without skipping a beat, Klaus immediately decides to return to New Orleans to find her despite the danger, because remember, he still has a part of the hollow spirit inside of him and he can't be close to Hope. He teams up with Marcel, but they're unable to trust anyone in town, so together they decide to rule the town as ruthless dictators so they can use fear as a weapon against everybody. Klaus is an original and a hybrid, Marcel is an enhanced original with the power to kill vampires with his bite. They're basically an invincible duo. Before long, Klaus is reunited with his daughter, and together they hop on a mission to find Haley. Except it turns out Haley is not really missing, that was all a trick. Yep, it turns out Hope used magic to put Haley in a coma, she put her in a coffin and then pretended she didn't know where she was. She did it to trick Klaus into coming back to New Orleans because she wanted her dad around. Once Klaus discovers the subterfuge, he makes Hope tell him where she is, but when they get there, her body is not in the coffin. Somebody kidnapped her, and this time, Haley is missing for real. And meanwhile, the student Hope turned into a vampire is mysteriously murdered, and his body is left on display in the streets of the French Quarter. So, the premise is basically that Haley is missing, and we have to find her, but also we need to find out who in New Orleans is responsible for her disappearance and for the murder of Henry. It's a very simple plot. In theory, it should work, but it doesn't work because it's just not a good mystery. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'll say it again. Season 5 is unbelievably boring. The plot is dull, it's so uninteresting, and just poorly constructed. For a final season, this is by far the storyline that feels the laziest out of the entire show, and it feels very scattered and messy because this season is not only the final season of the originals, it's also season 0.5 of Legacies. It spends an extended amount of time setting up Hope as a protagonist and introducing characters we're gonna see in the spin-off, I guess. Episode 1 is not that bad, it's actually quite promising at first, but the more this plot evolves through the season, the shittier it gets and it falls off really quickly. But hey, episode 1 has its moments, I guess. Caroline Forbes appearing in the premiere was a genuinely nice surprise. I love this character and I love Candice King in the role. And while I never cared for the Klaus/Caroline pairing romantically, I do enjoy seeing these two interacting. I think I just really missed Caroline. I'm glad that she's a prominent part of the season. She shows up every 2 or 3 episodes and she always helps move the plot forward, and I kind of appreciate it. And because I always forget about the timeline, some of their interactions sometimes surprise me. In episode 12, Klaus and Caroline have a conversation during which Klaus asks her to execute a plan that she, Damon, Stefan, and Elena threatened him with a long time ago. And that is when I realized, holy shit, yeah! I always forget about the timeline of this show, but we are very far into the future now. I mentioned it very briefly, but season 5 picks up 7 years after the events of season 4, which means we are now about 15 years after the events of the pilot. I believe Klaus and Elijah arrive in New Orleans towards the end of 2011, which would set season 5 in the year 2026. So this is actually taking place long after the end of TVD in the timeline. So yeah, by that point, these two go way back. By season 5, Klaus and Caroline have known each other for almost 20 years. Klaus's war against Elena Gilbert and the Salvatores in season 2 and 3 of The Vampire Diaries, you know, the whole doppelganger storyline, yeah, that took place 17 years prior to the events of this season. Even in terms of the characters, it's easy to forget because the originals are over 1,000 years old and a lot of characters are well above 100, but when you take a look at characters that are still in their first quote-unquote lifetime, the difference is striking. When we meet Hailey in season 1, we know she's in her early 20s, but in season 3, it's said explicitly that she's 25, which means in season 5, she's 37. Hope is now 15, perpetually off-screen Davina is theoretically 30 years old, but she did die for 5 years, so technically she's only 25. Josh is turned into a vampire at age 18, I think, meaning he dies in season 5 at 33. Like, yeah, this is all taking place very far ahead in the timeline. I always kind of forget that. Klaus and Caroline are indeed very old friends. By that point, Caroline has known Klaus for most of her life. I like their bond, it's sort of grown on me over time, and in the context of their romance that truly never was, despite my distaste for it, I do like that one of their last conversations has them telling each other without really saying it that they will always have feelings for each other, and they share a final kiss in New Orleans as a goodbye. Like, fine, it's cute. I have a heart, okay? Making Hope a main character this season was a risky move, but it works out sort of okay. She's not my favorite, but she's fine. It's just kind of funny to me how ridiculously overpowered she is. Hope is a tribrid, meaning she's not only the most lethal witch the world has ever known, she is also a vampire and a werewolf. But not only that, her dad is an original and a hybrid, her mom is the alpha of the Crescent Pack, and her grandma is the original witch. Basically, even as the only tribrid in existence, she's still a super tribrid. She has the full might of an original, the extra powers, abilities, and immunities of hybrids. She has the power of a Crescent Alpha and the power of the original witch. On the scale of the TVD universe, Hope is basically God. She's so fucking overpowered. It's hilarious. Episode 3 is entirely dedicated to Elijah and what he's been up to since his memory was wiped. It's literally just Elijah in Paris. He meets a vampire there, they fall in love, she teaches him her ways, blah blah blah. The episode is kind of boring, to be honest. It's only fun to watch Daniel Gillies because he's just impeccable at playing the different versions of Elijah. He's just way too good in this role. What I do like though is the effects we are shown to the Michaelsons being either too close to each other or too close to Hope. Whenever they get in any kind of proximity, nature starts to act weird. Plants die in seconds, snakes appear out of nowhere, it starts raining blood. Like, it's kind of cool. The idea is fun, but that's about it. That's kind of all there is to like about season 5. Everything else is just awful. There are a few moments here and there that are worth it for the characters. I guess episode 8 is pretty good, but that's about it, really. Okay, let's speed run through the plot. Basically, the whole mystery of season 5 boils up to the reveal that the Michaelsons were infiltrated by a family of German vampires who want revenge on Klaus because he killed one of their family members back in Nazi Germany. Oh my fucking god. The woman Elijah meets and lives with in Paris is one of them. The vampire Hope has a crush on at school is one of them. And one of the vampires from the French Quarter is their mother, and she's leading the operation. They're the ones who kidnapped Hailey. Hope finds her, but Hailey is forced to renounce her wolf side with a magic thing, which makes her a simple vampire now. She's no longer a hybrid. Klaus arrives to save her, but Elijah arrives too, and he's one of the bad guys right now, so a fight erupts in the house, but they fail and Hailey dies trying to save Hope. And I just have to say, her death scene is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Basically, she rips out the lady vampire's finger to get rid of her daylight ring, and then she grabs her and jumps outside of the house into the sun, and both of them burst into flames and die. I'm sorry, that's fucking stupid. Number 1, why did Hailey not just push her outside for her to burn while staying inside? I get that she's not a werewolf anymore, but she's still a vampire. She has super strength. She could have pushed her while staying in the house. There's absolutely no reason why she had to kill herself in the process by throwing herself outside too. But not only that, Klaus just stands there and does nothing. He just screams no as he watches her burn. But broski, you have super speed! Not only are you an original, which makes you faster than the average vampire, but you're also a hybrid, which makes you even faster than an original. We've seen in this show that regular vampires can move so fast that they're invisible to the human eye. You're telling me it was too late to save her? She's right in front of the house. You could have dragged her back into the house in like 1/10 of a second. I'm sorry, I love Hailey as a character, but the way she goes out is so infuriating. It's such lazy writing. I hate it. Anyways, now she's dead, and that's the end of the first act of the season. And now we're moving into the final act of the show. Everybody is really depressed that Hailey's dead. Hope feels guilty because none of that would have happened if she hadn't pulled that trick on her parents. Klaus feels guilty that he couldn't save her, even though he totally could have. And then blah blah blah, some useless bullshit. Somehow the power of the Hollow returns into Hope, and now she's in danger. It's starting to corrupt her, yada yada yada. Elijah gains his memory back and is riddled with grief because he's basically responsible for Hailey's death. Freya and Keelan get married. Still awkward. Then we find out that the spirit of the Hollow is destroying Hope from inside out, so she wants to end her life and kill the Hollow along with herself. So now we have to save her before she goes through with that plan. Okay, we've caught up. Now let's talk about the ending. Basically, the ending of the originals is about Klaus making a final sacrifice for his daughter. He travels to Mystic Falls to meet with Caroline, and he asks her if it would be possible for her 2 witch daughters to transfer the spirit of the Hollow from Hope into him. After which he will need somebody to kill him with the White Oak Stake, the only weapon that can kill him for good. That way, Klaus destroys the Hollow with him.
Do you remember when you and your friends threatened to chain me up, drown me in cement, and drop me in the deepest ocean? Well, when your daughters have put the magic in me, I need you to make good on that threat. I won't fight you this time.
Well, I was just a kid back then. I didn't know. That was a long time ago.
I can't allow my daughter to die.
And so that's exactly what happens. Caroline's daughter siphoned the Hollow spirit out of Hope and put it inside of Klaus. Elijah tries to stop it, but he can't, and now the Hollow starts to destroy Klaus from the inside, and he doesn't have a lot of time left. In the series finale, Klaus reunites with his family for one last time, during which he tries to get everyone to accept that he has to die to save Hope. It's a tough pill to swallow, but everybody understands. There's an admittedly very heartwarming scene where the entire family sits at a table to have a final dinner, and it is the first time that we see them being the united family they've always wanted to be. There is no drama, no one is trying to kill each other. For the first time, they are just being a family. They're laughing, sharing stories, drinking wine, remembering Klaus, just spending time together and making a memory that will last. Then Klaus gives a final goodbye to his family in a speech that, again, is brilliantly performed by Joseph Morgan.
You know, as much as I've savored the joy of tormenting you throughout the years, I must confess, you all mean everything to me. Your loyalty and your counsel and your love is probably the only reason why I've survived as long as I have.
He says his final goodbyes to everybody, shares one last moment with his daughter, and he leaves. He heads to the bench where he first sat with Elijah when he came back to New Orleans in the pilot, and there he is joined by Elijah, who announces to him that he has made a last-minute decision. Elijah thinks that life doesn't make sense for him without Klaus. He has spent 1,000 years trying to save his brother's soul to make him a good person, and in a way, he's achieved that. Klaus is about to leave this world as good as he's ever been as a person, but Elijah is tired. 1,000 years on Earth Earth has been a ride unlike any other, and the only end he sees for himself in order to find peace in his demise is to leave this world by Klaus's side. So he is going to die with him.
What if there's nothing after this? No peace. Just darkness. We face it together.
The two brothers stand together for one last time, have a final heart-to-heart. They give each other one last look full of love and tenderness, and then the brothers dagger each other with the white oak stake and disappear together in the air of New Orleans. Cut to black. And that is how the originals ends. While it's in the middle of a truly horrible season, it is an emotionally impactful final bow for these characters, and I can very much appreciate how their individual stories ended. Anyways, I'm gonna talk about Citizen Kane now. Citizen Kane is a mystery drama and an undisputed legend of classic cinema that came out in 1941. It was directed by Orson Welles, and it tells the story of a journalist named Jerry Thompson who is tasked with investigating the meaning behind the mysterious last words of a multi-millionaire newspaper publisher named Charles Foster Kane, who recently passed away. His last word was Rosebud, and nobody knows what it means, so in the very public announcement of his passing, this becomes a mystery people want to crack. The movie actually opens with the moment Charles Foster Kane dies. We watch him on his deathbed in his mansion as he holds a snow globe and utters the word Rosebud right before dying. It's very ominous, it's an iconic sequence from cinema history, and it kickstarts one of the most iconic mysteries ever known to the medium. This will make sense in a minute. Citizen Kane is now widely known as one of the greatest movies ever made. Its legacy is a thing of legend. Ever since its release 82 years ago, the film has been praised by critics as an absolute tour de force and a piece worthy of the greatest cultural achievements in the arts. And to this day, it is still being cited as a primary inspiration for some of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And also, Citizen Kane is the movie that probably has the biggest plot hole in cinema history. Yeah, despite being praised for its impeccable storytelling, this movie has one major plot hole. One big flaw that makes its entire story technically impossible. Like I said earlier, the first scene of the movie is the one where we see Kane die. He's on his deathbed, he says Rosebud, and then he's a corpse. We, the audience, see this entire sequence play out from beginning to end, which means we, the audience, also see that Charles Kane died alone. He was by himself. He was the only person in the room when he died. So how does anybody know what his last words were? The entire plot of the movie is about finding out the meaning of Rosebud, but that can't be possible because there's no way anyone knows that's the last thing he ever said. It's a plot hole that fans of the movie have learned to ignore over time because the rest of the movie is so good, but it is a particular pet peeve of mine because there are some minor plot holes that I can find tolerable because in the grand scheme of things, they're kind of inconsequential. But bro, when your plot hole is so big that the entire story you're telling logically cannot happen, that kind of grinds my gears a little bit. My brain has a hard time letting that go. I do like Citizen Kane though, like don't come for me, but this is the perfect example of one of my biggest pet peeves in film and TV. You get where I'm going with this, right? I assume you do. If not, I'll spell it out for you. The ending of the originals is a plot hole. All of it, the whole thing, the entire final arc of this show is a massive narrative oopsie. It makes no sense and it shouldn't be possible. Let me explain. The entire last arc of the originals, like I said, is about Klaus taking the hollow spirit out of Hope, putting it into himself, and then committing suicide to kill the hollow in the process. Okay, yeah. That shit's not possible. In season 4, it is explicitly said to us that the reason why the Hollow is fucking invincible is because the only people that can hurt her are people from Hayley's bloodline. They're the only people that can hurt her. But newsflash, Hailey is dead, and she was the last of her bloodline, which basically means that the Hollow is now officially unkillable. Oh, but wait, no, because Hailey has a daughter, Hope. Hope is the last person alive with Hailey's blood running through her veins, which means she should be the only person able to hurt the Hollow and potentially kill her for good. The idea that Klaus can just take the Hollow spirit inside of him and kill himself along with it is fucking bullshit. It's not possible. Do you want to know how I know that? Because season 4 shows you that it's impossible. We see people possessed by the Hollow's life force die, and it doesn't kill her. She just jumps into another host. The way the show ends, the way they defeat the Hollow, is literally the one thing we are told repeatedly is useless against the Hollow. According to the show itself, Klaus dying basically did nothing. The Hollow should still be alive because the only person who can defeat it is Hope. This is something that the Vampire Diaries universe does a lot that annoys me so much. The writers always come up with a bunch of very specific rules about the supernatural elements of the story for the sake of world building, but then they systematically write themselves into a corner and they just start breaking their own rules out of nowhere because they don't know how to fix it. The whole time, the whole final season, I thought the tragedy of all of this was that since Hope is supposed to be the only person capable of harming the Hollow, it would turn out that in order to make this plan work, she would have to be the one to kill her father, because it's the only logical way for it to happen. But no! The writers just kind of forgot about the bloodline story, and Klaus dies by being staked through the heart by Elijah. It makes no sense. This whole thing shouldn't be possible. Anyway, I'm done talking about it. This is so fucking stupid. So yeah, that's the end of the show. It's not great, it's pretty bad, but I feel like it could have been worse. I mean, I'm trying to compare that to the Vampire Diaries series finale, and I think I will choose the originals one any day of the week. Overall, the biggest problem I have with season 5 is that it's just a bad story. It's a bad story for the show, it's a bad story for the characters, it has awful, just dreadful pacing. These 13 episodes feel like an eternity, but at least the very end does an okay job at ending the stories of most of the characters. Like, the individual character arcs all end in a way that I personally find very satisfying, except maybe for Elijah, but we'll talk about all of that a bit later. So, the big question that everybody is asking me is, Dylan, is the originals better than the Vampire Diaries? Well, my answer is yes. I think I would say so. I think the reason why this is such a massive debate is because these two shows have very distinct identities, like I said much earlier in this video, but I think there's several ways to look at it. If we look at it in terms of consistency with quality, yes, I would say the originals is the better show. Throughout its entire run, its quality is way more steady, it's more consistent. It definitely has its low points, don't get me wrong, but the originals at its worst is never as bad as the Vampire Diaries at its worst. Like, we're never reaching TVD season 7 and 8 levels of bad. Not even close. But also, if we're looking at it from a highs and lows point of view, then yeah, I would still say the originals is the better show. Seasons 2 and 3 of the Vampire Diaries are really good. Like, they're both great. They're so much fun. It does so many interesting things with the lore. I think most people would agree that these two seasons are the show at its best, but in a way that's kind of cheating, because the reason why TVD is at its best in those two seasons is mainly because of the originals. But still, the point stands. I'd say the first 3 seasons of TVD are the ones that give them the most legitimacy next to the originals, and I would have said the Vampire Diaries is the better show if it wasn't for season 3 of the originals. I'm sorry, season 3 is too good. This is truly the season where the student has surpassed the master. This is the season where the originals becomes better than the Vampire Diaries. It didn't last because seasons 4 and 5 suck ass, but I'm sorry, I won't budge on that. The Vampire Diaries at its best might be really good and a ton of fun, but it's not as good as season 3 of the originals. In my eyes, for that season alone, the originals puts the argument to bed. It wins. And one of the main reasons why it wins is because of its cast. Let's talk about the characters now.
You got me feeling mellow. You think I'm acting ghetto. You're weird like Jared Leto.
Yep. If there is one thing that makes this show so good, and I believe that is one thing that is completely undeniable, is that the cast of the originals is vastly superior to the cast of The Vampire Diaries. It's not even fair. And I love the cast of The Vampire Diaries, don't get me wrong, it's an amazing cast, but yo, this is lightning in a bottle. The cast of the originals is 1 in a million. It is by far the most memorable thing about the show. And that is true both for the characters and for the actors playing them. See, the thing that makes the original cast so good is the sense of persona brought on by the actors. Each and every single one of them, for the most part, made their characters their own in ways that most actors cannot. Now, I'm about to say something a bit controversial, but I don't care. I'll just say it. If you look at The Vampire Diaries, I think Elena Gilbert could be played by literally anyone. I like Nina Dobrev in the role, but anybody could play that character and it would be perfectly fine. She just doesn't stand out that much. I like Paul Wesley as Stefan Salvatore, but I think this character also could be played by anyone. He just doesn't have that distinct of a personality. Same goes for Tyler, or Matt Donovan, or Vicky, or Jeremy, or Alaric. It's not that they're bad in their roles or anything, not all of them at least, but like their characters just don't stand out that much. They don't have that thing that makes some characters so unique and memorable. You know what I'm talking about? Oh, and by the way, while I said anyone could play Elena Gilbert, I do believe only Nina Dobrev can play Catherine Pierce. You can't change my mind on that. What I mean is, there are characters that just have that thing, that little oomph that is brought to the table by the actor playing them, and it elevates the character to something much bigger than what's in the script. It's like Ian Somerhalder as Damon Salvatore, or Leighton Meester as Blair Waldorf, Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Fleabag, Viola Davis as Annalise Keating, Andrew Lincoln as Rick Grimes, Neil Patrick Harris as Barney Stinson, or, one of the greatest examples of all time in cinema, Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow. Some characters are just infinitely elevated by actors, making them feel like individuals, like people with their very own mannerisms and speech patterns. You get the idea. Well, this is kind of the thing with the originals. Almost every character in the show is like that. These actors elevate this cast so fucking much, it's kinda crazy. Almost every single one of the main characters is made a unique individual, and almost all of them stand out in their own unique way. I don't give a shit what anybody says. There isn't a single actor on this planet who can play the role of Klaus Mikaelson aside from Joseph Morgan. That's impossible. You can't do it. He made him too unique. He's the only guy who can play him. You put anyone else in this role and it falls apart. It doesn't work. He's the guy. Joseph Morgan is Klaus Mikaelson. The character is just as iconic as his performance. There isn't a single actor on this planet that could do what Daniel Gillies did with Elijah. He is Elijah. He made Elijah. I'm sorry, I know this might piss some people off, but on paper, Elijah Mikaelson is not that interesting of a guy. His character is kind of redundant. A lot of the things he does are very repetitive, and basically he could very easily be super boring because he's honestly not that well written if you really think about it. And yet, he's probably the only character that people love more than Klaus. You wanna know why? Because Daniel Gillies elevated this character so much that it almost doesn't matter if he's boring. He created a persona for Elijah that is just irresistible. He made him the most charismatic, magnetic, suave, captivating and classy motherfucker in the world. His line delivery is so fucking smooth. He has very specific mannerisms when he talks, and when he moves, he just feels like his own person, and it makes him a very unique character. Charles Michael Davis is Marcel Gerard. Claire Holt can never be replaced as Rebecca. They tried and it didn't last very long. Vincent Griffith is a really lame character. He sucks. He's really boring and one note, and he hardly ever gets a real storyline to himself. On paper, I should hate everything about him, but you know what? Yusuf Gatewood, the actor who plays him, somehow made him so fucking cool that I still love this character every time he's on screen. I just love watching him. Gatewood gave Vincent such a strong personality. He made him so effortlessly charming and charismatic in every single line he delivers. He feels like such a distinct person. It's honestly an exploit. Yusuf Gatewood made Vincent way cooler than he had any right to be. He made a lame character cool with his presence alone. And even though he's boring as shit, he's one of my favorite characters in the show. And look, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend every single one of the characters is a fucking masterclass. Okay, I gotta be fair here. Some of them kind of fall flat. Like I said, Camille O'Connell just never truly works as a character. Leah Pipes is good in the role, but not in any way that particularly stands out. Davina... well, look, you can't win them all. No offense to Danielle Campbell, I've never really seen her in anything else aside from the originals, but I gotta be honest here, she was never really good as Davina, and it's not at all helped by the fact that I just do not like this character. She's necessary to season 1, she's literally the reason why Marcel is technically invincible, but I just don't like her. She's so annoying. And Davina doesn't really matter after season 1, and she doesn't do much. So she just kind of falls into the background until she's very awkwardly written out. There are a lot of characters in the show. Some of them work really well, and some just kind of don't. I'm not going to talk about everybody, because that would be way too long. Like, I like Josh just fine, but like, there just isn't that much to say about him. But I am going to talk about the ones I deem the most important. So on this note, let's dive in. Klaus Mikaelson. All right, fucking finally time to talk about the big guy. The big bad wolf, the baddest of them all. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it with an intro here. Klaus Mikaelson is one of my favorite TV characters of all time, period. He was fantastic as a villain in The Vampire Diaries, and he is fantastic as a weird anti-hero in the originals. I already talked about how Joseph Morgan is perfect in this role, but I think it's super important not to underestimate just what he brought to this franchise. True story, when I was a teenager and watching The Vampire Diaries in my little bubble, I knew a lot of very macho dudes at school or whatever who thought they were too good for a teen drama about vampires. And I don't remember how, but I somehow convinced them to watch it, and they realized they liked it more than they thought they would, so they kept going. But believe me when I tell you that the second Klaus showed up in season 2, these guys became the biggest fucking fans of The Vampire Diaries you've ever seen. He is just that captivating. I even know people who don't know shit about The Vampire Diaries. They've never seen it, they don't know what it's about, but they know Klaus's name. If you talk about Klaus Mikaelson, they just know it's the bad guy from The Vampire Diaries. And I'm just gonna say it, I think Klaus deserves to be in the conversation for the greatest villains in television history. And you can't change my mind on that. Yeah, Homelander is terrifying. He's probably number 1 if I'm honest. Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones? Hard to make someone more detestable. Gus Fring from Breaking Bad? Easy top 5. Livia Soprano? Absolutely. Mads Mikkelsen's Hannibal Lecter? legendary. Harmony Cobell in Severance still gives me chills. I kind of have nightmares about her sometimes. But without the shadow of a doubt, Klaus Mikaelson is sitting at the table with all of them. And that is exactly why the originals had a real challenge with him. They had to take him from this irredeemable monster of a villain to someone you can get attached to in a way where you can kind of see him as a good guy. I would have been very skeptical because this could have gone south very quickly, but somehow they made it work. They actually managed to turn Klaus into an anti-hero in a way that makes perfect sense. Like, honestly, the evolution of his character in this show is very well done. It's impactful, but also subtle, and the transformation he gets feels very logical in retrospect, because at its core, if you really look at it, the originals is essentially the story of the last 17 years of Klaus's life. We're witnessing the last 17 years in the life of a man who has lived for 1,000. He was the world's most terrifying villain for a millennia, the biggest of the bads, a name that makes the entire supernatural world shake. We're reminded constantly that very few people in history have been more evil than Klaus, and yet, somehow, he died a good man. And my favorite thing with his character throughout his entire time in the franchise is that his themes are super consistent. It's something the writers never ever lost sight of. Because fundamentally, Klaus is a character that just can't get out of his own way. When we meet him in the Vampire Diaries and he's going through an insane amount of trouble to try and create an army of hybrids, it's initially played as this super villainous plan where he gets to be powerful and be feared by all and blah blah blah. But then, later on, we find out that Klaus is going through all this trouble to do it, not for world domination or whatever, but because he's absolutely terrified of the fact that he's the only hybrid in existence. He's doing it because he's afraid to be alone. And that is the biggest theme that explains almost everything about why Klaus is the way he is. His entire life, he has felt like he doesn't really belong anywhere. He's a bastard because he's the result of an affair his mother had, so he always feels this distance from his siblings that, for the most part, only exists in his head. Elijah, Rebecca, Cole, and Finn always try to reassure him that it never mattered to them that he was a bastard. It doesn't make them love him any less, but he's feeling very deeply insecure about it, and he can't see it that way because it's another reminder that he's different. Added to that, he's also the only being of his kind. In the entire world, he has nobody to relate to. So he's closed off, he pushes people away, he acts impulsively, and he realizes that it's easier to be feared than to try and be loved. He believes that if people are afraid of him, it means they respect him, but that's just not the case. And this show really explores that duality. We see that despite his nature, Klaus is often really hurt by the way people perceive him. He doesn't like that people look at him and only see an evil bastard with no redeeming qualities. There's an entire storyline in season 1 where Klaus compels Camille to write his memoirs, but he also compels her to forget about everything he says the second she leaves his house, because he actually likes Camille and he's afraid that she's gonna judge him, or that she's gonna be too afraid of him to ever look at him again. All of his relationships are very interesting, and I think this story in particular does a great job at giving those relationships more nuance. His bond with Elijah is literally the heart of the show. Elijah is the only person who has always accepted Klaus for who he is and loved him unconditionally. You could say that Rebecca too. Rebecca has always loved Klaus, but she has walked away from him numerous times, and she has often considered never going back to him. Elijah never did that. He's literally incapable of doing that. And as much as Klaus never brings it up, he sure is aware of it. The last words he says to Elijah before he dies, and his last words period, are, "I don't deserve the love you've given me," because he knows he has spent his entire life spitting on the loyalty his brother showed him repeatedly. Klaus finds it really hard to let people in, even his own family members, because he's always being crushed under the weight of his own fears and impulses. People always expect the worst out of him, and most of the time, the sad part is that he gives them a solid reason to. He systematically disappoints everyone who chooses to believe in him, and he drives them away. And it hurts him, but he always brushes it off by taking it with ego. He's Klaus Mikaelson, the original. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to answer to anyone. But then he feels bad when people look at him with such disappointment. Because, like I said, Klaus just cannot get out of his own way. However, this show justifies that. This time, he changes for the best in a real way. Because Klaus is confronted to something everyone thought impossible. He had a child. That is the most world-shattering event to ever happen in his life. Now, everything is different. After 1,000 years, Klaus finally feels like he belongs somewhere. He belongs to Hope. He is a father to Hope. There is no denying here. There's no speculating about the legitimacy of it. He is Hope's father. He now feels like he truly is a part of this family. All of the motivation he needed to find a way to grow, to get out of his own way, to evolve into the man his closest loved ones believed he could be, all of it is finally here. He couldn't do it for himself, but he would do it for Hope. And throughout the show, you can see that gradual change in him. And I will say that I do like the way Klaus's story ends. I despise the whole plot hole that makes it technically impossible and everything, but in terms of bringing his arc full circle, I think they absolutely nailed the end of his story. The originals have spent 1,000 years surviving just to survive. They lived a long, very, very long life, and they defeated every single person that ever tried to end that life. However, as it's expressed a few times in the show, mostly by Rebecca, living to no end makes no sense if you're not living for anything. They were surviving just for the sake of surviving. So, the idea that Klaus Mikaelson finally accepts death after 1,000 years is a very fitting end to his character. The fact that his acceptance of death comes with a final wish to protect his daughter is even better, but most of all, I like that ultimately he remains undefeated. By the end of his story, Klaus Mikaelson was never truly beaten. No one was ever able to kill him. He does die, but he dies on his own terms. And I think that is the best exit he could have ever been given. Klaus is a 10 out of 10 character. He is an absolute legend of television, and Joseph Morgan deserves all the respect in the world for the iconic way he portrayed and carried that character to the finish line. He is the one true MVP of the Vampire Diaries universe. Alright. Let's talk about his brother now, Elijah Mikaelson. Alright, I feel like praising Elijah at this point is too easy, because everybody knows he's the ultimate fan favorite character, and there is a reason for that. Elijah is awesome. He's just such a delight to watch on screen. And like I already said, it is 100% because of Daniel Gillies' performance as the character. A performance that should have won him an Emmy if you ask me. I think it's one of the most overlooked performances by the industry. The way he brings this character to life just blows me away constantly. Out of the entire originals cast, he's the only one who actually feels like an old man trapped in a young man's body. Everything about how he plays him is legit. Like, I believe this guy is 1,000 years old. I believe he comes from another time period. The biggest strength of Elijah in this show is absolutely his dynamic with Klaus. These two bounce so well off of each other, it's crazy. They literally function like the yin and the yang. Klaus is this unhinged maniac with a hint of goodness deep inside of him, and Elijah is the honorable man fighting for the soul of his family, but with a heavily repressed darkness locked away in his core. They kind of need each other to exist. Klaus would become an uncontrollable dragon if he didn't have Elijah to bring him back down to earth constantly. Elijah is the one who convinces Klaus to stay in New Orleans and care about Haley being pregnant, because Klaus at this time only wants power. And similarly, if Elijah didn't have to fight with every atom in his being to preserve Klaus's humanity and save his soul, he probably couldn't bear to live with the darkness he is constantly trying to keep hidden. My gripe with that is that I was never a big fan of the Red Door plot attached to his character. It's fine when it's brought up in season 2, but then the use of the Red Door in later seasons gets a little dumb, because in my opinion they take the concept and make it way too literal in a way that I think very unfortunately takes away from the complexity of Elijah as a character. And I think it's on that note that I have to share an opinion that breaks my little heart. I love Elijah to death. I think Daniel Gillies elevated this character more than anyone could have ever dreamed, especially when you remember that he was initially supposed to be a throwaway villain for one episode of The Vampire Diaries, and I think no one can ever take that away. But I just gotta say it, I think this show's last couple of seasons kinda ruin Elijah. I hate to say it, I really do, but it's just true. As much as I adore his character, the writing he's given in seasons 4 and 5 kinda mess up a lot of what makes him really great. Like in season 4, Elijah is just weird. There's just something about the way he's written that feels off. Yes, some people have pointed out that he becomes too violent out of nowhere for his persona to work. Again, this is the season where he murders children for a sacrifice, and I sort of agree, but also not. I know the idea is that he's willing to do horrible things if it means protecting Hope, which is not at all out of character for Elijah. He would burn down the entire world if it meant saving his family. Elijah is honorable and all, but make no mistake, he has shown time and time again that he will commit unspeakable atrocities if he's put in a position where he feels like he doesn't have a choice. Hell, at the end of season 3, he literally causes Davina to die the most horrible death we've ever seen on the show. And then he kills Marcel! I mean, not actually, but like he thinks he did. And he feels horrible about it. Like he believes this is the one thing he will never be able to come back from, because he did love Marcel, but still, he felt like he didn't have a choice. It was the only way he had to protect his family, so he didn't even hesitate to rip his heart out. So that's not really my issue with him here. Rather, it's more in the overall expression of the character, if that makes sense. Elijah feels weirdly distant in season 4. He's seriously lacking the warm moments of wisdom he's known for. He's way more quiet, not as opinionated, and he's just not on it like he usually is. For most of the season, he feels like a sad puppy. He's just sort of there along for the ride. I'm not sure if the writers just didn't really know what to do with him, or if they were just trying something different that didn't land, but either way, it doesn't matter, because the end of the season is where they're really starting to mess with his character way too much. Look, I can understand the reasoning behind Elijah deciding to have his memory wiped before leaving his siblings. I get the thought process, but I just don't like it. I just have a hard time believing that he would do that. The one thing he has always stood for is his vow to his family, always and forever. I can't believe that someone as devoted as Elijah would just decide to not honor that promise. And again, I get the thought process, I understand he's doing it for Hope, etc., but I don't like that this is the route they chose for him. It just feels off. I think it kind of goes against what the character is, which then leads me to season 5. I have no idea if this is an unpopular opinion or anything, but I really don't like the Elijah doesn't remember who he is storyline. I don't like it at all. It is fun to watch Daniel Gillies play Elijah so differently, like I'm sure he had a lot of fun doing that, but I also think it is easily his worst storyline, and I hate that we have to spend 2/3 of the final season with this amnesic version of the character. And surprisingly enough, I'm also not the biggest fan of Elijah just deciding to die with Klaus at the end of the show. That, to me, feels completely out of character. You cannot convince me that Elijah would choose to abandon Hope. I refuse to believe it. Every desire he's had to save Klaus's soul was in the hope of building a life like the one they were starting to have by the end of the show. Hope is the greatest gift the Mikaelson family had ever been given. I get that Elijah's life would take a different turn without Klaus, but I think it makes way more sense for his character to transfer this worry and care and devotion to Hope as a primary guardian now that Klaus and Haley are dead, rather than just choosing to leave her behind along with Rebecca and Cole so he can die with Klaus. I don't know, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, man. Like, I get what they were going for, and I still have a lot of appreciation for the final scene of the show. Elijah telling Klaus that living by his side despite everything was his greatest honor, essentially reassuring Klaus in their last moment that he has no regrets about loving him to the very end. That's all amazing. It's a beautiful scene, and again, his relationship with Klaus is the heart of the show, but I still think the decision itself is a bit out of character for Elijah. But with all that said, I still think Elijah is one of the biggest MVPs in the franchise. Like I said, he is the fan favorite for a reason. He's a fucking icon, and Daniel Gillies deserves all the praise in the world for his work as the character. Between the Vampire Diaries and the originals, he has played Elijah in a grand total of 115 episodes, and he outdid everyone in almost every single one of them. You fucking legend. Okay. Let's talk about the sister now. Rebecca Mikaelson. Rebecca is a character that I love way more than I probably should, and I think that's all thanks to Claire Holt absolutely slaying this role on a regular basis. She's just so good in it. Rebecca, if I remember correctly, is the youngest of all 7 of the Mikaelsons. She's the baby of the gang, and before they found out about the existence of Freya in season 2, she was also the only girl in the family. And on paper, Rebecca is a character that could have been really annoying, but not only do they manage to make her super likable and attaching, they also step her the fuck up as a character in the originals. Because when we meet her in the Vampire Diaries, Rebecca is characterized as more of a petty and spiteful girl with a temper more so than anything else. She gets very one note very quickly, and her mean girl energy makes her character kinda dull after a while. However, the originals fixes that immediately. This show takes a much more mature approach to her character, giving her more layers and a larger emphasis on her feelings about her family and her relationships within that. I don't really like that throughout most of her existence in the universe, Rebecca's only real motivation in life is she really wants a boyfriend, because I think it often takes away from very interesting aspects of her character, but that does change a bit in season 2 as her character mainly becomes the primary protector and guardian of Hope, Klaus's daughter and her niece. From that point on, a lot of her character becomes about the desire to sever her ties with the supernatural world. She wants to experience the joy and beauty of being human. Because yeah, Rebecca fundamentally hates the idea that she will live forever. She doesn't see the point of immortality. After having lived for 1,000 years and experienced more than the human brain can even comprehend, she comes to the conclusion that life is only worth living if it ends, kind of echoing the Michelson theme of surviving just for the sake of surviving. In episode 8 of season 5, Rebecca has one really good scene with Marcel where she talks again about how all she wants is to be mortal, to have children, and to grow old. Marcel tells her that there is value in being immortal, that they get to live side by side and bear witness, see history being made, experience life as eternal beings in a world where everything has an end. He sees that as a privilege, but Rebecca sees that as a curse. And the way she explains it is really consistent with what her entire character is about. She responds that she thinks Marcel is good at being a vampire because he chose to be one, but she never had that choice. And that is pretty much the main theme of her character in a nutshell. Rebecca's entire life has been plagued by people taking her choices away from her. She never got to make a decision for herself. She was never given that grace. Everything she is as a person, she was forced into being. Like, as it stands, she has no real notion of who she would be if she could choose her own path, because that has literally never been an imaginable option for her. And that's why her final goodbye with Klaus in the series finale is so impactful and so emotional, and one of the few good scenes of that episode. Klaus formally apologizes to her for putting himself in the way of her happiness, and he recognizes she deserved better. So, as a parting gift, he asked Caroline to get the cure to vampirism that was introduced in season 4 of The Vampire Diaries, and he tells Rebecca that it's waiting for her in Mystic Falls.
You don't have to apologize.
Well, then let me make it up to you. I've asked Caroline to get you the cure. In a handful of decades, when it's time, you can go to Mystic Falls and get it. Then if you no longer wish to be a vampire, it's your choice. Live the life you've always wanted to live. My sister.
Thank you.
And that, right there, is the greatest gift anyone could have ever given her. For the first time in 1,000 years, Rebecca is given a choice. For the first time, she gets to decide where her life is going to go. Klaus gives her the ability to live the life she always wanted to live and to figure out for herself what that means. Because even as a mortal, she still has a long life to live. It's easy to forget because Claire Holt was in her 30s by the time the show ended, but Rebecca is supposed to be frozen as a teenager. She became a vampire at 16 or 17 years old. If she becomes mortal, she could easily still live for another 90 years. I think it's a very fitting end to her character. It's the most obvious and logical end, but sometimes that's not a bad thing. It's a very natural conclusion to her story, and I think it's perfect for her. It's really well done, and it just really hits emotionally. Of all the murderous vampires we've known in this franchise, Rebecca is probably the only one that deserved a happy ending. Maybe with Caroline. I think Claire Holt made this character so much more than what she was initially meant to be. She gave her so much heart and vulnerability. I think Rebecca is one of the most important characters in the TVD universe, and it's a character I will always remember fondly. Alright. Next, Marcel Gerard. And here we talk again about a character I didn't expect to love as much as I did. Marcel is fucking dope. I actually kind of forgot how cool he was in the beginning of the show because his character gets a little stagnant halfway through season 1 and then he's just kind of there in season 2. But Marcel, early into the show, was the shit. Charles Michael Davis plays the character with so much swagger and presence. Like, as soon as you meet him, you're like, oh, yeah, that guy is a leader for sure. There's just something about his line delivery. There's like a magnetic charm to it, even when he's being threatening.
I got rid of the werewolves. I even found a way to shut down the witches. The blood never stops flowing and the party never ends. That itch you feel, that's the need to feed coming on strong. A hunger for human blood. Drink it, you're a vampire. Don't, you die again. This time for good. Right here in a body bag. This is how I keep my guys happy. the occasional all-you-can-eat buffet. My night walkers love it. Got them working hard trying to earn one of these daylight rings. Last time I saw you, Royal Street was burning and you all were fleeing the city from your daddy.
I thought you were dead.
You never look back to find out. You want to pass on through? You want to stay a while? Great. What's mine is yours, but it is mine. My home, my family, my rules. Hey, what do you think? Cute dorky girl or gay best friend?
Dealer's choice.
Dealer's choice, okay.
He's just so good at it, and his more tender moments are just as well done. Obviously, Marcel's very unique relationship with Klaus is one of the most interesting aspects of his character. The constant internal conflict he's in between Klaus being a rival as well as a father figure is really interesting. Their back and forth throughout the show is always really good, and you can see just how much they care for one another, even though they never agree on anything, and low-key always want to kill each other. I will say though, the concept of Marcel being a child slave rescued by Klaus is very dodgy to me, because the implications of that are a little weird. The whole backstory is that Klaus rescued Marcel from slavery as a child and then raised him like a son with Elijah and Rebecca. He was the adopted child of the Michelson family. But then Marcel became an adult, and Rebecca fell in love with him, which, ew, that's literally the child you raised.
Grooming.
And Klaus found out that these two were starting to fall in love, and he got very jealous, so he daggered Rebecca for a century to punish her for taking what is his. Do I need to explain why that's fucked up? The show tries to make Klaus rescuing Marcel from being a slave a proof that he has a heart, which, sure, I can see that. But then, he outwardly speaks about how Marcel belongs to him. He views the child slave like his own personal possession. Anyways, it's really just another example of Julie Plec being Julie Plec and being eternally oblivious to the way she treats and writes black characters, but whatever. Oh, and also, yeah, I haven't mentioned it at all in this entire video, but Rebecca and Marcel have one of the biggest romantic plot lines in the show. They are right there with Haley and Elijah, and the thing is, despite the very awkward implications of them falling in love, they do work as a couple. Like, if you ignore the very obvious cringe, their romantic storyline is fairly well handled. In season 1, we find out that Rebecca and Marcel are the ones who brought Michael to New Orleans in an attempt to get rid of Klaus so they could be together without his jealousy getting in the way. Over the course of the show, they're very on and off, but it becomes very clear very quickly that they're gonna be one of the endgame couples. And it makes sense that they end up together, it all adds up. In the series finale, Rebecca tells Marcel that she's going to take the cure to vampirism and live a human life. And she tells him that if he's okay with that and can accept it, then she would really like to be able to live that life as his wife. And obviously, he says yes. It's fine, whatever. This relationship is not the best aspect of either of their characters, but it's there, it's okay, it's not a bad romance at all. Like I said much earlier in the video, Marcel is really at his best in season 3. I think this is truly where the writers figured him out. His entire storyline is so compelling, and it works really well because it relies on every aspect of his personality to function. So he really gets to shine in many different ways. Marcel is an infinitely loyal friend, a fierce leader, but also he's a terrifying enemy if he needs to be. And nothing showcases the balance between all three of these traits better than season 3. I like this character a lot. I think he was one of the best additions to the TVD universe. And also, I know that ship has sailed, but I would have killed to get a scene where Marcel gets to meet Damon Salvatore. That dynamic would have been so fun. Okay. Next. Haley Marshall. Surprisingly enough, I haven't talked about her all that much in this video, but Haley is probably one of the most important characters in the originals. For the first half of the show, she's pretty much the glue that's holding the Mikaelson family together. Haley is a young werewolf with a mysterious past who doesn't really know where she's going in life, and she is one of the most perfect examples of a character that is just a constant victim of her circumstances. The way this show starts for her is just brutal. She got pregnant from a one-night stand at only 23 years old with the first vampire child in recorded history, who also happens to be the child of the most powerful original, and suddenly she became the #1 target of the entire supernatural world. Yeah, she didn't exactly win the lottery here, but it's not something that'll stop her. The thing with Haley as a character is that she is used to things not going her way. She is a survivor. She's always had to depend on herself. She was abandoned by her parents, then adopted, then abandoned again. She doesn't really know who her family is. All she's ever wanted is a family, and unfortunately for her, the family that finds her is the Mikaelson family. She and Klaus sort of hate each other. In the beginning of the show, they literally cannot stand to even be in the same room. But Haley doesn't give a fuck. She has an attitude. She will get in an original's face and tell him to shut up. The way these two fight is both hilarious and crazy, but also we watch them develop a very unique bond and a particular brand of respect for one another. It's the type of relationship where it's very clear they care very, very deeply for each other, but they'll never say that out loud because they're way too proud. Some of the most tender and emotionally interesting moments of the show are scenes where Klaus and Haley just sit down and talk about how they feel. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, they just have this way to bring each other back down to earth. And by far, one of the most emotionally impactful moments in the entire show is the scene from episode 2 of season 3, where Haley breaks free from the Crescent Curse and fights Klaus to punish him for keeping her away from their daughter.
There's a very short list of people who've tried to take hope away from me, and you're the only one left breathing.
Are you that delusional, Klaus? You cursed all of us. Every wolf that I fought for, everyone that stood up for our daughter, you took all of them away from their families.
Yes, your precious pack. That family you chose over us, and in doing so, you chose over hope.
Klaus knows he's in the wrong, and he stops fighting back because he can hear how broken she is when she tells him that her parents abandoned her and she never had a family, but that Hope deserved to have something better.
My parents left me. Yours turned their backs on you. Look at us now, Klaus.
Niklaus!
She deserves something better than what we had. That is all I have ever wanted for her, something better. Fight back! Fight back!
Bro, this scene is so fucking good. And then, if that wasn't enough, as a final gut punch right in the feels, Klaus looks behind her and she turns to see Hope standing right next to them. And then you just watch Haley break down as she realizes that Hope can walk now and that she wasn't here to witness her first steps.
She's walking. When did she start walking? I missed it. I missed everything.
Did I mention season 3 is fucking crazy good? Like, god damn, when this show really hits the emotional moments, they really hit. That scene always gets me, and I've seen it so many times. I really love Phoebe Tonkin as Haley. I wasn't too sold on her in season 1, but I don't know what happened. Starting in season 2, her acting just steps the fuck up, and by season 3, she's just way too good in this role. And like, Haley doesn't always get the best storylines, but whenever an emotional beat that is pivotal for her arc happens, she always delivers. She's just such a tragic character. The beginning of her story is tragic, the middle of her story is tragic, her romance with Elijah ends tragically, and obviously she's given the stupidest death of all time in the final season, but thematically it is still tragic. All Haley ever wanted was for Hope to have a united family and parents she can always rely on, but by the end of the show, Hope is an orphan and her closest uncle is dead. She just wanted to have a family for her daughter. Even Klaus admits at the end of the show that one of his big motivations to grow and unite with his siblings is the fact that Haley wanted something better for them. It's just the type of person she was, and it sucks that she never gets to see that happen. With all that said though, I think the unfortunate part of Haley for me is simply that despite the fact that I like her a lot, almost every storyline that is directly linked to her is like my least favorite part of the show. A big theme of Haley's character in the originals is her mysterious past. She doesn't know where she comes from and she wants to find out, which means, you guessed it, most of her personal storylines are about werewolves, and that's just my least favorite part of any Vampire Diaries bullshit. I know I've said it so many times already in this video and in the Vampire Diaries video, but I don't like the werewolves. I just don't like them. She eventually finds out she's like the queen of the wolves or something, and she goes away to lead a pack, and she gets married to some other wolf while still being in love with Elijah, but she's a little in love with the other guy and blah blah blah. It's really boring. Her character is at her best when she's directly involved with the Michelsons. Whenever it's time for her to go spend an entire third of the season in the bayou with the wolves, it's when her character just stops being interesting. I do wish that we had explored her friendship with Rebecca a bit more. They had a very solid dynamic in season 1. Like, as soon as they met, there was this instant respect and solidarity that I found really charming, but that kind of goes away afterwards. I don't think they get to interact that much. I don't know. Either way, Haley is a really cool character that brings a lot of heart to this show. She's kind of the conscience of the originals, which I really like for her character. Unfortunately, unlike most of the other characters, the writers completely fumbled the end of her story. They really dropped the ball with this one. I cannot stand the way Haley goes out. It was just lazy writing, and she deserved so much better as a character. Shame on you, writers. And that's pretty much it in terms of characters. Those are easily the most important ones and the ones about who there is the most to say. Yes, there are other characters. I like some of them, I don't like others, but overall, there just isn't that much to say about them. I like Freya just fine. She grew on me over time. She's a nice addition to the cast. But for me, that's kind of it. Same goes for Jackson. I really like the actor who plays him. I really like what he brings to the character. I just think the character is really boring and I don't have much to say about him. His death scene was very impactful. Really sad to watch, especially for Haley, because that's like one of the most heartbreaking moments for her, but that's it. Camille, as I've said before, was never my favorite. She's not the worst character in the show by any means, but she's also not great. And then she dies, and I don't think it affects the show all that much when she does. It is cool that Leah Pipes came back for a cameo in the series finale, because her character is very important to Klaus, and even though it's just a hallucination, it was a nice touch. But yeah, not much else to say about her, really. Vincent, as I said, is a character that is entirely carried by Yusuf Gatewood being a gifted actor that more people should know, and I love him for that, but writing-wise, he's kind of boring. Cole is very interesting as a character at first, but he ends up getting pretty whiny, and then all he ever does is talk about how he's married to Davina, and nobody cares about Davina. Nathaniel Buzolik is just impeccable in this role. His comedic timing and his sarcasm are always welcome on my screen, and holy shit, hold on. I just realized that most of the originals cast is made of Australian actors. Wait, no, that can't be right. It's an American show. Claire Holt is Australian, Phoebe Tonkin is Australian, Nathaniel Buzolik is Australian, Rebecca Breeds is Australian, Nathan Parsons, Oliver Ackland, Claudia Black, who played Dahlia? Jesus. Wait, is Daniel Gillies Australian too? Wait, let me check. Oh, he's from New Zealand. He's a neighbor. God damn, that's fucking crazy. I don't think I've ever seen such a large amount of Australian actors in an American series. That's wild. And you know what? Good. The cast of the originals is fucking goated. It is genuinely one of my favorite TV ensembles of all time. And like I said earlier, this was lightning in a bottle. I have never seen a cast elevate each and every single one of their characters in unison so much. The chemistry between everyone is fucking electric. I think this will always be in my top 10 ensemble cast. They'll never be able to recreate something like that. Like, honestly, this might actually be the best cast on any CW show ever. Alright. Let's conclude. So last year, in my Vampire Diaries video, I decided to conclude the whole thing by ranking the seasons of the show. And to me, I think it feels just as appropriate to do it again this year. Last time though, I did it from best to worst, but this time, because I want to finish on a positive note, we're gonna go from worst to best. If you have your own ranking, feel free to drop it in the comments down below. I'm gonna have fun going through them. And again, follow me on Instagram. Because I'm probably going to be talking about more of that in my stories. All right, we're ready? Let's rank all 5 seasons of the originals from worst to best. And in dead last, at number 5, we have Season 5. Not surprising, this is the worst season of the show. It's a terrible story. A lot of it is kind of insulting to the fans, and I hate it. It barely works as a conclusion to the show, and it barely works as a prequel to Legacies. Thankfully, some character arcs do come to a satisfying end, but it's not enough to save the messy and incoherent plot of the season, especially if we remember that the entire final arc is a plot hole. I hate this season. Goodbye. At number 4, we have Season 4. It's not good. While it has memorable moments that I do like, the overall thing is a fucking mess. The Hollow is one of the worst villains in this entire franchise. It is such a boring villain in a boring story carrying a season that can only be described as painfully mediocre. Season 4 is the most forgettable season of the show. You're done. Goodbye. At number 3, we have Season 2. A kind of mid-story that still has a lot of very solid character moments. It's especially disappointing because it's such a step down from Season 1, but the moments that work really work. It very much serves as a conclusion to the whole arc that truly started in Season 3 of the Vampire Diaries, and wrapping it with a little bow so we can move on. They do it sort of alright, but overall, it's just kind of whatever. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Goodbye. At number 2, we have Season 1. I really like Season 1 of the originals. I really appreciate that it tries to be different from its predecessor. It tries a lot of very interesting things. Not all of it lands, but I think it's an incredibly well put together political thriller with a supernatural twist. It is great at setup, it has a way of building tension that just clicks, and the stakes are so different from anything we've ever seen in the Vampire Diaries. I really like the way it recontextualizes the characters we know and introduces us to new characters at the same time. It's great. Season 1 has its weaknesses, they're hard to ignore, and yes, it has bad pacing, but overall, the good very much outweighs the bad. This season is solid as hell, and I like it a lot. Goodbye. And at number 1, we have Season 3. The masterpiece, the best season of any TVD Universe show, and I don't even need to have seen Legacies to say that for sure. This is such a fantastic season of TV, man. I love this story. The Godfather mob boss vibes, the mystery behind the ancient secret society, the character drama, the plot twist, the flashback storyline, the death scenes, the fucking finale. Oh my god, man. This season is a fucking ride. It's too good. Yeah, it has pacing issues towards the middle, sure. I don't like the new characters. Okay, you know what? None of that fucking matters because everything else about this season is pretty much untouchable. It is so good. This season takes all of the potential the Vampire Diaries franchise has and it cranks it up to 11. This shit is fire. If I had to make a list from the best seasons of TV from CW shows, this will easily make my top 5. And let me tell you something, it's not gonna be number 5. I think this season is right up there with season 1 of Gossip Girl and season 5 of Supernatural. Season 3 of the originals fucking slaps. It truly had no right to be as good as it was. You are the GOAT. Goodbye. And there you have it, guys. The originals, one of the few spin-offs I can think of that ended up surpassing its show of origin. Despite having its fair amount of flaws, I love this show. I honestly didn't expect to love it as much as I did when I rewatched it. It has great themes, very creative story ideas, and like I said, a fucking world-class cast. I'm really glad I got to experience it fully. Thank you guys so much for watching this very long video, and thank you for being so patient with me. I know that I announced it well over a year ago. This was part 2 of the trilogy, 2 shows down, and 1 more to go.
But if you know, you know.